who's raising Superman's date rape love baby. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to episode 28 of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host, KiramidHead.
And I am Deusdaecon, back once again.
And, that's 2 months in a row. That's the second time we've done that.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the third time because we did, because their first two were Hellraiser 4 and Castlevania.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And then we did Hellraiser 3 and Silent Hill. So, yeah, and I'm not going to need you again until Christmas at the earliest, so.
Yeah, I think that would give everyone a break, let's be honest.
Yeah, to give me a break, too, yeah. But tonight we are, and also before I jump into it, I'm going to throw in a bit of a plug at the beginning to check out our social media pages, Screenplay Archaeology at Facebook and Tumblr and Twitter, which is at Screenplay Arch 6, I believe, because of really stupid character limits.
Yeah.
And because of that, I actually had to change the main page name to Script Archaeology because I was tired of it. I was tired of it being called Screenplay Arch.
Right, yeah.
And it's probably going to be gone by the time you hear this, but I do have a Twitter poll up asking what potential episodes you'd be interested in, and so far it's been a landslide with all 2 votes going to Superman Lives.
One of those was me.
Yeah, oh, cool. I guess you really didn't... I was thinking about putting an option in there as a joke for Star Wars, but it only allowed me 4 options.
Right.
Come on, Twitter, with your stupid limits. Get cleaned up. And so yeah, tonight we're going to be covering 2 really unmade adaptations of the Vertigo comic Preacher. And it's 3 scripts, but 2 are 2 very similar drafts for the most part. So we're just going to list all those differences off at the end of the first draft. And before I get into that, I want to do a quick shout out to another podcast, which is the Gone to Texas podcast, which is following along with the Preacher TV show. And I was listening to them and, sending in mail and stuff. And we were talking and they encouraged me to actually wait and do the episode when season 2 started. Because originally I was thinking, let's do it at Christmas. They said, okay, you should do it when the season's on, set the buzz is going and stuff. No, okay, that's a good idea. So now here we are.
Yeah.
So yeah, check them out at G2T podcast.com. Also check them out under that name at the G2T it's G2T podcast on Twitter too, I think. Sorry, I got tongue tied there. But go check them out. They have some interesting thoughts on the series. And yeah, I figured I should do that, and that advice kind of killed me a little bit because for the longest time we heard jack shit about season 2.
Yeah,
it was
true.
Are you gonna say anything, Seth Rogen? Are you gonna say anything? No. And it's just oh yeah, January we're filming, and Dominic Cooper tweets out a picture of bloody intestines on the road. And I think right before that at Christmas there was a script page, a script title page, But yeah, so
season 2 did kind of spring up on us, I think.
Yeah, it did, and it's it made me worried if it was even going to be coming out because we had more news about the Punisher spinoff, and there's been fuck all about that.
Very strange.
But I'm talking about. I won't go into too much detail about this because I want to avoid any potential spoilers for the TV show as it's in progress. So I'm only going to be talking about comic spoilers as far as they're relevant to the scripts we're reading.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make note that I think these scripts they're closer to the comics than the TV show, so it's very unlikely they're gonna, spoil the TV show too much, I think.
But I do think there's some potential in there to an extent, there are some places where I will have to outline certain things that could potentially tie into the TV show, so fair warning right off the bat.
Yeah, it's unlikely, but very possible.
It's because we don't know.
Yeah.
We just literally have no clue as to whether it will tie in or not, which I actually find kind of intriguing. But to just talk about the background quickly, and it is going to be much quicker than usual this time because there's only really two things to talk about here.
Mm.
I discovered the comic around 2012, I think. It was sometime in college, and across those years, I kind of collected the whole thing and read through it. And one of my favorite comics, now, I think it's, and the whole storyline basically is, and this is going to stretch across the script, so this is going to count as my summary, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that the premise is basically that there's a minister in this town called Annville in Texas, which is this shithole, full of horrible, nasty people named and his name is Jesse Custer, and one day, while he's in his church and he's just railing against these people, this being called Genesis, which is busted out of heaven, comes and, like, possesses him and gives him these powers, which means that people have to obey any sort of command he gives. And you find out as it goes on that it's the product of a demon and an angel copulating, and you get the idea that it could be just as powerful as God, and God has run out of heaven, and so Jesse Custer decides he's going to go track God down. And into this mix comes his ex-girlfriend, Tulip, who's kind of pissed at him for leaving her behind. And then the Irish vampire Cassidy, who just kind of stumbles in and decides to go along for kicks, and eventually out of a kind of twisted friendship for Jesse, which goes to some not pleasant places later on, but I don't want to spoil too much. And so the whole thing is like this sort of Western, supernatural, dark comedy, but still with some really strong, serious drama tied in there with some conspiracy theory stuff, and it can get very 90s. And it's just got this big, colorful cast of characters, which are just wonderful. And it's not perfect.
Yeah, it does it toes that really interesting line between dark comedy, and it kind of flip-flops between those three in a very nice way.
And I do think it does sometimes go a little too far in one direction or the other.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And Garth, and it just becomes rather weird how the whole thing is based. You basically have Garth Ennis's obsession with castration.
Yeah.
And you have like every possible permutation of that is explored. And it's like, come on, man, you really are way more obsessed with dicks and balls than you want to admit, aren't you?
That's a good point, actually, when you think about it.
And it's just this really great sort of entertaining epic read, and it does have its flaws. Like I said, there's this arc in the middle where they go to New Orleans, and they really don't go there for a very good reason, and fuck all is really accomplished by that storyline. Like, he just kind of hangs out with some voodoo people, we meet some people Cassidy pissed off, and stuff happens. Really, the one thing to come out that's actually memorable is that there's a bit of a certain character looking in a mirror, and that's a character who's about to enter into the TV show, so I don't know if they're going to do that scene, so I won't spoil it, but it's pretty fucking hilarious.
Oh, interesting, okay.
It's Air Star.
Yeah.
There's just like 3 different pages of 9 panels of him just looking in the mirror.
Right.
With this really great punchline of him going, shit. But I'll let you find out why on your own in case they go there in the TV show, and I think it's something they can just get away with on AMC.
Oh, yeah.
If they can
I wouldn't be surprised if they did do it.
Because they get away with more than I would expect, and if they can get away with Cassidy chattering on about foreskins in the pilot.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And like the weird shit with the dog that's not a dog.
Yeah, the dog man. That was weird.
Which I don't know what that is, but
I know.
But no, the comic's great, and now Deusdaecon has not read the comic.
I've read the first paperback.
The first paper. Yeah, so you got the setup, and so you know what's going on in the first script.
I know the basic premise. I know enough. Like, basically everything that's touched upon in the script I know about. Yeah. For the most part.
For the most part. Like, it does kind of, because the first script, both scripts really kind of they're mainly based on the first arc.
Yes.
Where Jesse gets his powers and we're introduced to the Saint of Killers, who's basically Heaven's assassin.
Yeah.
To an extent, but he really doesn't answer to anybody other than himself. He's uncontrollable. And he's this Western cowboy who has his whole backstory involving the Civil War, and he's basically sort of an extended homage to Unforgiven and several other Westerns. And so that's really what the scripts I'll cover at the beginning. One does it better than the other one does, and I will say both of them are flawed, and I like the current AMC TV show much better.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing about this, is the fact that regardless of how bad the script might be, at least we have a pretty damn good final product.
Yes, it's like almost like if we did the Castlevania episode after that series premiered, because I remember back when we did that, it was like nothing's going on. Like, thankfully this shit didn't get made, but like Warren Ellis was going to do an animated trilogy, but that didn't happen. But hey, Warren Ellis's version has basically been made now.
Yeah. In
a different format, but it's been made. But yeah, and the TV show, I think, it's not directly adapting the comics. It's coming at it from kind of a, what's the word from approaching from the side? It's on the tip of my tongue.
I know what you mean. I can't quite think of it myself.
But yeah, it's taking sort of a sideways approach to the material and Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg are kind of making it their own.
Yeah, and I think what's key as well is that they get the tone, they get the atmosphere perfect, but they just tweak it a little to make it something unique.
Yeah, the tone and the atmosphere is perfect, and I think the taming down of certain elements helps it play better in live action.
Yes,
because
it's less crazy.
Yeah, because some of the really perverse, bloody things that happen in the comic, I don't know how they would play in a live action format if they would just come off as too silly. Yeah,
they would either be too silly or people would just be, what the hell is this, you know?
Or if it's like Punisher Warzone, where they do the whole overblown action that's funny, but it doesn't quite play in live action. It also doesn't help that it veers between being really goddamn serious and really goddamn ridiculous from scene to scene.
Yeah.
That's a film where it's actually closer to Garth Ennis' kind of Punisher comics than the other movies are, and even he thinks it's the worst one. Because he was asked which one is better, the 2004 or Warzone. He said, "Well, the Thomas Jane version," but that's not saying much. Which I don't fully agree with that. I don't fully agree with that because I do like the Thomas Jane movie. But to get back on track, no, the TV show I think is really good. I mean, Dominic Cooper as Jesse Custer, he's playing not really comic book Jesse. He's playing a different approach to the character, because Jesse in the comic books is this very sort of straightforward, take no shit kind of John Wayne sort of character. And there's the elements of that in his performance and in the writing, but it's almost kind of a deconstruction of that kind of character.
Yeah, you can tell he's definitely looked at the character and he's kind of just made it his own in a way.
Joe Gilgan as Cassidy is practically right off the page.
Yeah, and that's pretty damn perfect casting, to be honest.
He's one of those things I was actually kind of leery about when the first trailers leaked, because he doesn't wear the sunglasses that much and they barely showed him. So it's wait a minute, what's going on? And then you watch the pilot and it's yeah, he's perfect.
Yeah, especially his whole introduction was crazy.
Which they still haven't connected back to that yet.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what's going on with that.
I mean, unless they end up tying into the Grail, the big religious conspiracy. I can kind of see religious fanatics like that tying in.
It's entirely possible.
Because Cassidy says he doesn't know how the vampire hunters are finding him. And the infinite resource, you don't know too much about the Grail, but they basically have infinite resources because they have hands in every pocket. So maybe they're funding these guys or something. But who knows if they'll even ever come back, because pilots sometimes don't always get referenced.
Yeah, that's true. It is technically a pilot as well, so it's hard to say, really. I would like to see them come back, because it was an interesting idea.
Yeah. For example, even though they cut her out for the pilot, they filmed a whole bunch of stuff with Elizabeth Banks as a gender-flipped version of Kincannon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they filmed a whole bunch of stuff with her, and then they decided they wanted to go a more traditional route with the character, so she all got cut out of there. Except you can see her sitting in the church at the end of the episode.
Yeah, because I watched the first episode recently, and I was like, holy shit, that's Elizabeth Banks, what the hell?
She was gearing up for Rita Repulsa with that performance.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe it just will get kind of written out like that did.
Yeah, maybe. It would be a shame, though, because it was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, maybe I think they will get back to it. It just might take a while. They're taking a while to get back to the whole thing with Jesse's father, which we'll get to in these scripts. But they are definitely tying into what happened to him. It will happen. I don't know if it will happen in this season, but it will happen.
Yeah, especially in the last episode. Not to spoil anything, but there are references in this script and the last episode eerily similar.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff to think about with Jesse's character, considering the swamp thing that he does. Not to give too much away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but yeah, and I'll say overall, season 1 is. I will say the pacing is a little flawed in that one because even when I rewatched it on Blu-ray before season 2 came out, I was like, good lord, like the pacing drops around episode 4 and 5, but then picks right back up with 6.
Yeah, there's a few moments in the first season where it's like there's just extended moments where it's just music and they're setting scenes. They don't really do that in season 2 as much.
Yeah, and also, while I do like Ruth Negga as that version of Tulip, who isn't really comic book Tulip at all, but I like what they're doing with this version of the character, so I can't really complain. I do feel like, because they do it in both seasons, where it's like they feel like they have to give her a subplot.
Yeah, and it wasn't even that interesting, let's be honest.
And in season 1, it worked out okay in the end in season 1, but they just took so long to get there, because episode 1 and 2, she's just vaguely talking about some kind of job to Jesse, and then episode 3, it's like, oh, it has to do with Carlos. And then they forget about it for a while, and then for a couple episodes, she's like, Carlos, and you finally get the payoff for that in the last episode. And then
like you said, the pacing was all over the place.
And they do the same thing in season 2, but they kept it to a minimum and had it only really in 2 episodes. Which
I think was better because, as I said, it wasn't a very interesting subplot.
It was an okay subplot. It wasn't terrible. And the things it did for Jesse's character and showing the backstory a little bit more, I thought was good.
Yeah, I think the stuff with Jesse was a lot more interesting than the stuff with Tulip, to be honest.
Yeah, it did more for Jesse than it did for Tulip, yet she got more screen time out of it. Although I will say one of the other good things to come out, that was that really awesome bit where she's putting change into the cigarette machine while all those guys pile up behind her and she just doesn't give a shit.
That was quite tense. I like that.
That was a great way to end that episode. It's just like, oh.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going all over the place with what I'm talking about here, but what I thought worked about the first season is that it took the storyline and kind of stretched it out a bit so you could kind of acclimate the audience to just the utter insanity that is Preacher.
Yeah.
Because Preacher the comic just dumps you right in there and it's just crazy from the very beginning.
Well, basically, the comic starts where season 2 starts, essentially.
More or less. That's not entirely true. But yeah, basically it starts with them on the road and all this crazy shit is going on. And it works in a comic because when you're reading a comic, you have time to kind of sit there and think about it. And just you have time to kind of drink it all in the first time you read it. Yeah. If you had done that, and as we'll see in the scripts, if you had done that in a movie, it would be completely incomprehensible and would have turned off most of the audience.
Oh yeah, I can definitely see why it doesn't quite work. Especially in these scripts, it is a bit too jarring.
But no, I think they set it up perfectly, got the tone established, and gradually eased you into the insanity so that when you get into the weird angel stuff and God, essentially, although not God, and just all the weird kind of stuff going on, it made sense. It's a universe where it's like, okay, you can have vampires and angels and a kid with an asshole for a mouth. and also an immortal cowboy who can kill anything. It's one of those things where it's like, it just sets up this, because the characters in the town are all just these weird offbeat people. So when all that stuff ramps up later on, it's like, okay, I buy this universe happening. Yeah, plus I think with season 1 especially is that it started off quite normal. It wasn't, it wasn't great in terms of the situation, but it got more and more crazy and kind of fucked up as it went along in the season. And I think that was great to it was almost like the season was ramping up to what Preacher is, Yeah, exactly. And season 2 kind of picks up and it picks up the pacing, and the pacing is still moving along pretty quickly. Oh yeah, it's a lot quicker. Yeah, no, I was a little worried in the first 2 episodes that it was going to be too quick. Yeah, because they were very fast and almost followed a formula where they would drive, meet someone, talk to them, Santa killers would show up and there'd be a massacre.
Yeah, I was worried about that too as well.
But but episode 3, the pacing kind of evened out, and it's a good balance between the quicker kind of road trippy feel and what the first season did. Granted, I don't think every episode has been perfect. I mean, season 1 had a couple of slow spots. Season 2 had that subplot that didn't necessarily need to be there, and then episode 6, the latest one, got a little hokey.
Yeah, hokey is absolutely the best word for it.
Like, not bad per se, but it didn't feel like what Preacher was doing. It felt like the writers of the Constantine TV show took over for a week, and we both are like 2 of like the 5 people who watched that show. But sadly, but I mean, now it's getting 5-minute episodes on like CW Seed now, animated. That's depressing. But as long as Berlanti keeps Mark Guggenheim's grubby hands away from it, it might be okay. Because Mark Guggenheim is the guy who destroyed Arrow in season 3, so.
Yeah.
And he might have been responsible for some of the shittier parts of the Green Lantern movie.
Oh, Christ. Anyway.
Yeah. But, no, well, it's all DC. Vertigo is DC, so.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, like, I mean, it wasn't a bad episode. It just didn't quite gel with the rest of what they did before. It almost felt like it was we're tying off some loose ends for now before we jump into this other arc we're going to do.
Yeah, well, it did feel like this is an end of this particular arc. I'm not going to give anything away.
No.
But it was like, we're going to finish this arc for now, and then we're going to start this more interesting arc coming up.
But I know that character is definitely coming back this season because the Comic-Con trailer showed him hanging around, so.
Yeah.
In scenes that were not in this episode. So
I think it's a case of them just putting things on pause so they can start introducing new characters.
But things about the show I should like as a comic is I like how it can consistently surprise me in the direction it's going.
Oh yeah, I guess I'm consistently surprised by how they take things in certain directions.
And there's a good example of this where I won't completely spoil it if you haven't watched season 2, but there's a character who shows up whom I was thinking was an original character, and then it turns out she's a character from the comics. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then, oh, that guy was the bartender is another character who's always hanging around with her. Oh. And then they show Air Star, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah. It was a damn good reveal as well.
And it's a show that I love how the fact that I can kind of see where it's going. I can kind of put a roadmap in place, but I'm not necessarily sure where all the turns are going to be.
Which is a good way of doing things, to be honest.
And in fact, I like it. I like that they're doing this, and I like because Garth Ennis said he told Seth Rogen. Seth Rogen said Garth Ennis told him to make the show his own when they first pitched it to him.
And they've definitely done that.
And he talks about there's an interview with him on the season 1 special features where he says that, he's seen all these different versions come and go, and he always felt like the problem with making it into a movie was that there was never any time for any real kind of character moments in it, because it's like, it's always going to be like crazy character after crazy character getting introduced, and even if it's 2.5 to 3 hours long.
Yes, and it definitely felt like that reading these scripts.
Yeah, it did. It did. And he says he just loves that the TV show is able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because character and the heart of the characters is a big part of the comic book, even with all the insanity going on.
And can I just say, by the way, this might not be true, but I swear to God that I heard a rumor, and I'm talking ages and ages ago, that Preacher was being made, and it was being written by David Hayter.
I've not been able to find that anywhere.
It is a thing, though, is it?
I don't know if it was a thing or not. I've never read anything about it.
All right, because I swear to God I remember reading that.
I mean,
somewhere.
It wouldn't surprise me at all, because David Hayter has worked on about 1,000 different comic book things. Like, he wrote an unproduced Black Widow movie. He revised a version of Iron Man that was written by the Smallville guys.
Ugh.
And, of course, he did his version of Watchmen, which kind of became the movie.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, this is off topic, but he shot test footage of the scene of Night Owl and Rorschach in the kitchen,
I think I saw that, actually.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever been released, but I mentioned it before, I might have, but Night Owl was played by Ian Glenn.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You did mention it. I remember that now.
That's a better use of his talents than Resident Evil.
Absolutely, yeah.
Where there's like 3 different versions of him in the last movie, I've heard.
Yeah.
Fuck, put Ian Glenn in honestly, Ian Glenn would have been a good Saint of Killers.
Yeah.
I can kind of see that. Granted, I think Graham McTavish is about as good as we're ever going to get, and what I love about him is that he gets the voice down perfectly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because
it's described, if I can find the page, it's described really interestingly as if it sounds like, it describes like this groaning, creaking, like it's something about cobwebs. I'm going to see if I can find it because it's really good.
Yeah.
And the structure of this comic is kind of messed up because it's like, it does the fucking Tarantino thing of people sitting around in a coffee shop chatting and they're catching up on what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. It really doesn't work looking back on it.
I think it's supposed to be deliberately confusing to sort of really throw you in there.
Yeah, and then they'll narrate about stuff they can't possibly know about, which just kind of pisses me off. I'm sorry, it does. I can't find the fucking caption. Oh, the whole reason I got these trade paperbacks out sitting next to me is so I could find this damn caption, and now I can't find it. But it's described as just this creaky, deep, gravelly voice, and it sounds of like darkness and cobwebs, and I think Graham McTavish has that voice down perfectly.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And one thing that's interesting is that he has the Saint with this big old beard, which he doesn't have in the comics yet. It completely works.
Yeah, because in the comic he kind of has this kind of I want to say Clint Eastwood look to him.
It's a little bit of Clint Eastwood, a little bit of Lee Marvin.
Because but I think in the TV show it's a lot more grizzled.
Yeah, it still works. I mean, he is the Saint of Killers now. Like, I don't see anyone else playing him.
Absolutely.
Now, to get into the scripts, to do a little background on this, it was Garth Ennis who wanted it to be made into a movie, and he sold the rights to an independent group called Electric Entertainment.
Okay.
And they hired Rachel Talalay to direct, and Ennis was writing the script. Now, she has directed a shitload of TV, but she directed 3 films. She directed Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, which is god-awful. God. I know that movie has its fans, but the comedy in that film just doesn't work for me.
No, it really doesn't. I've seen it. It's just dreadful.
And the writing is terrible. And the next thing she did was Ghost in the Machine, which I've heard of, but I've never seen.
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
I think it's like a serial killer dies and comes back and it's like stalking people through a security system.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, and I could be misremembering this, but it kind of had that really low budget look to it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I've not seen it, but I've heard of it. And then the third film she did, which I think was such a flop it kind of killed her film career, was Tank Girl.
Oh well, yeah.
Which I've not seen it. It sounds like the kind of bad movie I might enjoy, but but my only knowledge of Tank Girl is from playing as her in Broforce, but that's about it.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
But yeah, she did a shitload of TV, most of which I haven't seen. Like one of the Flash episodes she directed, I saw, but I remember it being kind of like a let's connect to the next thing episode. And she directed something, we actually were talking about this not long ago. She directed the first episode of season 4 of Sherlock.
Oh!
That's
interesting.
The one that's in the running for worst episode of that series.
Yeah, the absolutely terrible episode.
Which started off okay and then just went to total shit.
Yeah.
And she's also directed some Doctor Who. She's the first American to direct episodes of the new series.
Interesting.
I'm going to read off the episode names and see if they
Yeah, go on.
Dark Water.
Okay.
Death in Heaven.
Oh, no.
Heaven Sent.
Oh, I no. Those first 2, I'm not a fan. Heaven Sent is okay.
Hellbent.
I like Hellbent as well.
World Enough and Time.
That's one. That's like the latest one.
The Doctor Falls.
Yeah, those are like the last 2 episodes that just aired.
And Twice Upon a Time.
That's the Christmas special. That's not out yet.
Oh, okay. So, what do you think of her Doctor Who work?
Spotty.
Also,
there are good parts and bad parts.
She directed an episode of Supergirl called Welcome to Earth, which is just making me imagine Will Smith.
That's exactly what I just thought of.
And
that's when you said that.
Also because he's also a DC character, and she also directed the Legends of Tomorrow episode called Last Refuge, which I checked the plot summary of and have not seen it. And like I haven't seen most of her TV work. Like I saw one of the Dead Zone episodes she directed called Shaman.
Right.
But I mean, her other 2, because I only saw the first season, and her other 2 are much later in the show. And I heard by the time you got to season 6 or so, it just got terrible.
Yeah, okay.
She directed an episode of Supernatural called Hunted.
I don't know anything about Supernatural.
I mean, I've heard of some of these shows, but fuck me if I've seen most of them.
The only thing I know about Supernatural is that Felicia Day was in it.
She directed 2 episodes of Kyle XY.
Oh, God. Now that's brought back memories. Jesus Christ.
Hands on a Hybrid.
No idea.
And Leap of Faith. Those are the Kyle XY episodes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I have no idea.
But yeah, I
just remember that show.
She did a shitload of TV. Like, she made The Jump only like... Wait a minute, I've gone down to producer stuff. Hold on. But no, she made The Jump to TV like only a couple years after Tank Girl, so she found her niche, I guess. But yeah, personally, I don't think of her as a director for Preacher.
No, absolutely not.
Going off of, and she also helped write Freddy's Dead. Going off of her comic sensibilities, they're way too broad and cartoonish for Preacher.
Yeah, absolutely not. It wouldn't work, to be honest.
And she stuck around for a while after this, but we'll get to that. So yeah, to dive into the script, what this script is it's almost a panel-for-panel adaptation of the Gone to Texas arc, which is the first 4 issues, which sets up the premise of Jesse Custer gets melded with Genesis, and then it ends with him going off on the trip to go find God and make him answer for being gone. And I just told you the entire script right there. That's all the important shit that happens. Everything else that happens is just nonsense.
Yeah, plus you might as well read the comics.
Yeah,
it's far more interesting.
And here's my thing is that I think it's a great comic arc, aside from the fractured, nonlinear narration bullshit, which is trying way too hard to be Tarantino and not as good as Tarantino. Like, it's a really good comic arc. There's not enough story in those 4 issues, even with them bringing in some stuff from the... People tend to refer to it as All in the Family because that's the first issue. The name I remember is How I Learned to Love the Lord, which is the stuff with Jesse's family. Even with that stuff getting brought in and done really shoddily in this script, there's still not enough story there to hang a movie on. So it ends up...
it needed a bit more.
It ends up feeling like an over 2-hour pilot script.
Yeah, that was the exact feeling. It felt like, okay, clearly this wants to be something more than it is. This is just a jumping on point. That's what it felt like the entire time.
And the fact that this essentially would have been an indie film means they never would have been able to make this.
No, plus there are some effects in this that I don't think would have been able to pull off very well.
Not in 98.
No, definitely not.
And okay, so this draft it's written by Garth Ennis, with story credited to Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, who I should mention he sadly passed away last year.
Oh yeah.
And they dedicated the season 2 premiere to him. And he's still credited as co-executive producer, so I guess that kind of so the show was co-executive produced by a ghost.
Appropriate.
I would be surprised if they make a joke about that. After all, they did literally name drop Game of Thrones and play the theme music. So,
yeah.
But no, it's dated May of 1998. Now that date is significant because the comic ran from 1996 to 2000. So this was written right in the middle of the run.
Yeah, so you can kind of understand why it feels like a jumping on point in a way.
But it's also really odd because certain things he does in this completely negate later story arcs, which would have been out at the time. Like, I think the stuff with the Grail would have been out by this point, and the Saint of Killers is in that.
Oh, okay.
So what he does to the Saint of Killers in this, which is so fucking stupid.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
And no disrespect to Garth Ennis, I love the guy's work, but this script is just not good.
Yeah, I think he's struggling moving from comics to film. Film. You can clearly tell it's a struggle.
Yeah, Jeff Johns is having the same struggle right about now.
Oh yeah.
But no, and what we're going to be talking about I think I mentioned this already, but there's 2 drafts, and we're mainly going to focus on the first one, and then after we're done, I'm going to sum up what the differences are, because they're relatively few, but some of them are major, some of them are minor.
It's something to point out, but it doesn't really change a lot.
And just to talk about this script there's one thing about the way the script is formatted that just pisses me right off, is that sometimes he fucks up and the scene description blends into the dialogue in terms of the indenting.
Oh yeah, that was really irritating.
And it
was like some characters were just saying weird shit.
And then you finally realize what was going on.
Yeah.
And it gets worse and worse as it goes on.
And again, I think that's down to him being kind of inexperienced with this kind of format.
But okay, I mean, I don't want to go too in-depth. I mean, I have all the plot beats written down. But I mean, I just don't know how far I should go into this. Like, okay, it opens on the town of Anvil, where Jesse Custer is the minister. And he's getting drunk in his church because he's just had a horrible life, and he's flashing back to his childhood, how his father was murdered by these 2 thugs named Jody and TC, and the father, before he dies, tells him he's got to be one of the good guys because there's far too many of the bad. He says, which is
definitely something in the TV show.
Yes, they brought that line back, but it has different, has a different effect on him as a character. And I don't really know how his father ties into all that stuff with his grandmother, so.
Right.
Like, that's the really interesting question mark I want to know about in the TV show.
Oh, okay.
But so yeah, Jody shoots him in the head, and they take Jesse back to Grandma's farm. Now, she's only called Grandma here, and her name is Marie Langell in the comics, and I'm guessing the reason why they don't say her name is because the script seems to imply, when it's condensing stuff down, that she's the father's mother.
Right, yeah.
Because because they say in the script, being a preacher is the duty of the man of the family, and your father tried to shirk his duty. It's not even really made clear why they decided to kill him in this draft.
No, it's more for convenience than anything else.
Because in the comic, what happened is that his mother was Marie's daughter. She ran away and met up with John Custer, and they became a family, and they had a kid, and then Jody and TC catch up with her, and they see the complication, so they force them to come back. And then he gets killed because he tries to help them escape.
I see.
He tries to get them out of there, and so they decide he's too much, and so they get rid of him. And so as this flashback goes on, we get Grandma teaching Jesse about God, and we get the scene where she talks about how God is always with you, and he says, actually, that's kind of scary. And so he gets put in the coffin for a week, which is they put him in this coffin with air hoses and then weigh it down with cinder blocks and put it in the swamp.
Which is incredibly horrible.
Incredibly horrible, and it's from the comic.
Really? That's actually in the comic?
Yes, that's in the comic. But the thing is that this lacks a lot of the punch it should have for me, because in the comic, the grandmother and Jody and TC, to a lesser extent, they're scary characters.
Yeah.
Like, they are just disturbing in the way that they are so completely sure that what they are doing is the right thing, and that they're so assured in their beliefs that just makes them scary, that they're doing these horrible things and thinking that they're doing what's right.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're terrifying, intimidating characters. Here they're cartoons, and annoying cartoons.
It's true. They never really feel like proper villains in the script.
And the whole thing with them, because they come back later in like the present day storyline, they're completely pointless. Like all they do is pad this thing out. And so what's weird, right, is that so we get this whole thing about him growing up and studying Bibles and stuff, and there's this incident where he sees TC fuck a chicken in the barn.
Yeah, that was very much Garth Ennis.
That's from the comic, but he's not the one that sees it. His best friend, who's this inbred kid with one eye who shows up in the other script.
Yeah.
He's sleeping overnight in the barn, and he sees that happen, and then TC kills him. Right. And that leads to Jesse calling him a cocksucker, and then he gets put in the coffin again. And he does get put in the coffin again here, I think. But it's odd, and then it cuts to like Jesse is 18 and Grandma is dying. And there's this ridiculous thing where she pops up after she's already dead and says, "You're gonna be a preacher," and then dies, which is stupid.
Yeah, that was very it kind of felt like what they called. I can't remember what it was, but it just felt really cheesy horror movie.
Oh, a jump scare?
Yeah, I guess.
And what's really weird about that, right, is that in the comics, she comes back. Like, she's a big part of a storyline where they run into her after he already has Genesis.
Hmm.
So he's kind of writing out his own storyline right there.
That is weird how he's like in Ennis, right now.
Yeah.
He's incredibly faithful at some parts of his story. But in other parts, he's like going really out of his way to just change almost everything about it.
But yeah, that particular storyline is basically what happens is that you have the Gone to Texas storyline, which ends with him setting off to look for God. Then they dick around in New York for a couple issues. And then they come back to Texas, and that's where the Angelville, Grandma, Jody, and TC thing happens. Right. And there's all this really great character drama stuff there, and that's when God first makes himself known in the script. So the search for God doesn't really amount to a whole lot in the comics, because he kind of comes to them. But yeah, here it's just kind of thrown in there. It's like, I guess it's a means of giving Jesse a little bit more characterization.
I guess, yeah, it's supposed. But the problem is, as well, is that a lot of what happens kind of doesn't really affect his character that much.
No, it doesn't. And it's because they're adapting that arc that those characters aren't in. And just kind of chucking them in there. It just doesn't work. It doesn't feel right. And so, yeah, you get that whole thing, and then it cuts, and then you have Jesse in the church, and then you meet Tulip as she's running away from some thugs, and she ends up in Cassidy's truck, and he drives away.
Yeah, they just kind of meet each other. It's very forgettable.
That's how it happens in the comic.
Mm.
Because we find out way later that she got into debt, and so she agreed to do a hit to get out of it.
Yeah, and that is in the comic. I remember that.
That is exactly in the comic. Her shooting off the guy's jaw on accident, him just looking at it. That's from the comic. And then she runs into Cassidy, and they drive away, and they just happen to drive to Anvil. And so, all right, it's the next morning with Jesse Custer in church, and there's it's described as only being about 20 people in there, which is different from the comic. Is that he's trying to do this sermon, I think, about forgiveness, and then he just realizes that these people don't care and they're hypocrites, and so he just loses his mind and just starts calling them out on all their sins. What's interesting is that this scene in the comic, it happens the night before at the bar. And I feel it makes more sense there, I feel. Like, this whole comic happening in the middle of the church is just this whole confrontation happening in the middle of the church is a little awkward feeling, but maybe that's just because I've read the comic.
Maybe. It's hard to say, really.
Yeah, it is hard to say, but I mean, and while this is going on, that's when Genesis comes streaking down and hits Jesse Custer, and then makes the church explode and reduces everyone to skeletons. Yeah.
Well, in both scripts, what's interesting is that the damage is kind of varied in different ways. Like, I think in the Ennis one, it's just the people and I think the roof.
Yeah.
Whereas in the other one, it's like the entire thing is destroyed.
Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter.
No, it doesn't matter. It's just something I noticed.
But what the main difference is that is that there's only about 20 people in the church in the comic. In the script. In the comic, because he has that breakdown in the bar, the entire town gets word and then comes to the church as like a sign of solidarity or, look at the freak, I guess. And
it kind of makes even more of an impact.
And so when that happens, basically the entire town gets incinerated. And the reason why they don't do that here is because the entire town needs to be there for later. Because the climax of the script takes place in Anvil, which is not in the comic. That part's not in the comic. And so, that happens. And while this is all going on in this draft, you have, like, the angels who aren't named. They're just called Angel, talking about how, this thing has escaped and blah, blah, blah. We need to stop it. And then one angel gets sent to wake up the Saint of Killers to hunt it down, because if word gets out that this thing has escaped, it could cause problems. And so he goes to wake up the Saint of Killers he opens the coffin where he's been kept for all these years, and then he just gets shot and killed. And he goes like, sorry, force of habit.
And again, I did like it was a pretty accurate recreation of how it happens in the comic as well, because I liked that bit in the comic.
And I'll skip over a lot of the angel stuff, because in this draft, the angels kind of just pop in and out of it here and there, and just kind of, they're just kind of there. They don't really have any sort of distinct personalities or characters, and the scenes they're in don't really accomplish much. In fact, one difference in the undated draft I'll mention here is that all of the angel stuff up until the end, aside from like the angel who shows up at the end, is all like taken out. And so you just get introduced to the Saint of Killers walking out of the desert.
Yeah, it's quite, I kind of like it like that because it keeps it a mystery. For a while.
I like the mystery. And what's weird about it is that in this draft, there's all these little descriptions of things where it's like trying to keep them a mystery, but it just reads awkward. Like, these are angels, but we won't know that till the end. And then when Jody and TC show up in their van, it's like, we're not going to show their faces now because we want to keep them a surprise. And I'm like, who else would it be? You'd still hear their voices.
Yeah. Plus with that, that whole thing where it says, we're not going to know these are angels because it doesn't look like they're in an angelic place. Yeah. But there's no real scene where it actually explains that these are angels. Is there?
Well, because at the end, the Saint of Killers says, I don't have any answers for you. You'll have to ask the angels.
Yeah, that was like, that didn't seem like enough for me.
Yeah, it's a little awkward. I like it better.
It is really awkwardly written.
That's one thing that definitely works better in that later draft.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, Tulip, who has been, because Cassidy just randomly happened to drive them to Anvil, which I have to mention this because I live in Texas, but they drove from Dallas to what they say in the comics at one point is Anvil is out west of Lubbock, which is about as far west as you can get in Northwest Texas. And it's like, yeah, no, I don't think they could have driven there overnight.
Yeah.
And then the comics, they like hitchhike over like 2 days from where Anvil was to Houston. I'm like, no. Texas is too big for that. This is definitely an Irishman who is too used to Ireland being small.
Some geographic liberties, to say the least.
Yeah, I like my maps. I like knowing my distances. So.
Yeah.
But no, so that happens, and then Tulip, drives the car away against Cassidy as well. Now, she doesn't know Cassidy is a vampire, and he's just laying out in the bed of the pickup truck under a blanket, which is in the comic. It's pretty funny here. I love how it's like, it's like, you stop this truck or else. It's like, I can't help but noticing you haven't stopped. And so she pulls Jesse out of the wreckage, and she wants to take him to the hospital, but she also wants to know why he left her high and dry in Phoenix. Which, that's differently motivated in both scripts, but I'll talk about that much, much later.
Yeah.
I mean, both drafts of this script, I mean. So they drive away, and then you get introduced to Sheriff Hugo Root and his deputies, who's looking at the wreckage of the church. And, okay, for those of you with really sensitive ears who like to stick to your safe spaces, I'm going to say a bad word. Tumblr, don't listen to this part.
It's necessary, though.
I have to say this because I'm not going to censor the dialogue because fuck that. But he gives his theory about how it was done by Martian niggers.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I read that and I thought that's still pretty, very Ennis, you know, and
it's very Ennis, but I don't think it plays in the script.
No, it doesn't play because it's kind of right out of left field, and it doesn't, like, everything around that doesn't kind of fit with it, if that makes sense.
But I mean, in the comic, it works because, I mean, everything is out of left field.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Nothing backs it up.
And you can see his completely serious facial expression while he's talking about how, hey, yeah, they like to kidnap white folks and do sexual things to them, sometimes even probe their asses.
Yeah.
And they got a spaceship with a Martian nigger frozen in a hangar somewhere, but they figure we're not ready to know about it.
Yeah.
And it gets even funnier because in the prequel issue about Arseface's backstory, there's a scene where he's just drunk in his backyard, firing his shotgun into the air, screaming "Martian niggers."
That's a nice payoff.
It is really funny, and I love this. I do like how he's like this crazy. He's like just this crazy conspiracy theorist who's worked his racism in there somehow, and he's clearly watched too much X-Files.
He's just, you can kind of see where he's coming from in the sense of, you know, he has this bizarre logic around his racism that, you know, revolving around this entire conspiracy, but it's still completely batshit insane.
Yeah, and it probably sounds funnier coming from just reading it in the script as dialogue. It doesn't quite work.
No, it doesn't. It needs to be spoken, really.
And I would love to get the actor who played Sheriff Root in the TV show to give him to read this dialogue, because they changed his character a lot in the show.
Oh yeah, in the show he's much more
human
and not crazy,
and he's reasonable.
Yeah,
and his relationship with his son is honestly kind of touching in a weird way.
It's touching and slightly tragic and all this.
Yeah, and he actually does care about his son, whereas in the comics he was an abusive asshole, and then he just refused to straight up talk to him after the suicide attempt.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's a ridiculous cartoon who's really funny in the comic, and I'm glad they changed him for the TV show, because I couldn't imagine spending a season with him.
Oh, Christ, yeah, that would have been just horrible.
It would have been just an overlong running joke. And I do like his line about how, like, this Sheriff Meeker is saying that, you know, he'll give you the helicopter and the marksman you want, but he wants you to talk to the media first. He's like, tell him, fuck you. Tell him I said, fuck you. He goes off on this long rant about media fucks. And okay, so it cuts to Cassidy and Tulip arguing by the road over what to do, and honestly, Cassidy kind of has a point. And he's saying, like, hey, I did all this stuff for you, this guy fucking left you, and I don't even get so much as a thank you.
Yeah, he does make a pretty good point there.
And Jesse starts waking up, and he gets these fragmentary visions about where Genesis comes from, about the angel and the demon, which he gets more of as it goes along. But I think that's more effective in the rewritten draft where you don't know what's happening.
Yeah, it is more effective when it's just flashes here and there, and you're like, what the fuck was that?
And so they get surrounded by the cops who have found them already. This is following the comic almost beat for beat, line for line in this part.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they get him subdued, but then Jesse discovers, his powers, the word of God as he calls it, and he orders them to drop their guns, and then they drive away. And because they've dropped their guns, this is when the Saint of Killers comes out of the desert and just slaughters all of them. Except for Hugo Root, who somehow manages to get away, which I don't quite buy.
Yeah, that was pretty... didn't make much sense.
And so, and he also takes down the helicopter, and that explosion gets the three in the truck to stop, and Jesse looks back and he sees the Saint of Killers coming out of the flames and goes...
Yeah, which honestly is a cool scene. Really.
Yes, I would love to see them do that in the TV show, especially now the Saint of Killers has a reason to hate him.
Yeah, exactly. That would have been really visually impressive to have huge fireball.
If they can afford a huge fireball.
Yeah, true.
I mean, hell is basically a Soviet bureaucracy in the TV shows, which is hilarious. And so this really is where this really is where things kind of slow down, and not a whole lot really happens for about 20 pages. This is where we get introduced to the fact that Jody and TC are following Jesse around in their battered van, and it tries to keep them a secret. And they kill one of the deputies who's somehow still alive, but that's not how the Saints' guns work. So I don't know how that is.
Oh yeah, that was weird, because he was still alive, and that makes no sense.
And they take him away, and they just keep popping in and out of this thing in their damn van, listening to this song with a stupid name called Jesus Drop Kick Me Past the Goalposts of Life, which I can't believe that's a real song. It is. I looked it up. And it's like, I'm like, is that like the only song they have on their damn 8-track?
Yeah.
And they just pop in and follow him around and don't do jack shit until the ending. All this stuff is going on, and like Jesse gets the new clothes and he gets the metal things to put on the collar. Now this is another like minor change in the next draft that I'll mention, is that the whole thing of Tulip going on a shopping spree and buying clothes happens off screen, cutting the bullshit basically.
Not enough, to be honest.
And Cassidy is like says he's staying with them because, he has, he sees the possibilities of Jesse's powers, which is something that comes up in the TV show where he's talking about, think of the possibilities, mate.
Yeah.
Here he happens to mention, my favorite bit was his like, hey, Mick, load all of Keith's coke into this jet plane and then sign this check. Rolling Stones reference. I don't think all of Keith's cocaine could fit in a jet, but whatever.
No. There's quite a few different variations on that. Cassidy fantasy.
Yeah, and in the two scripts, like one of the names of the models, they mentioned looking Southern Comfort off him changes for some reason, which it's still in the 90s. Why would it change? But yeah, this is about the time where we have Root meeting with his superiors, who are Meeker and Detective Dennings, which this is a weird change because Dennings in the comics is an FBI agent who has just shown up in town. That explains why he doesn't know anything, but here he's apparently just a cop who doesn't know anything. And we get like a lot of just, I forgot to mention, when the church blows up earlier, there's like a dog that's mentioned earlier, which just gets randomly killed by it.
Oh yeah, the dog shows up occasionally.
Yeah, did Warren Ellis take over the script for a few pages?
Yeah.
But no, to get back to where we were, we get sort of, the background on Hugo Root, and Meeker explains to Dennings that his son tried to kill himself with a shotgun, but he failed, and now he's Arseface, who has a big twisted arsehole for a mouth. And we get introduced to him, like, and his relationship with his father, where his father doesn't even acknowledge him. And this is another gag which does not play as a script.
No, it doesn't.
Because the first time you read it, right, like, he picks up the picture to show it to Dennings, and then you flip the page and you see Arseface right there. It's like, oh wow. And then like the subtitled dialogue comes in. It's like, oh, it's funny. Here it's just kind of like, eh.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And I can't quite put my finger on why, to be honest. It just doesn't. The pacing is kind of weird.
The pacing is weird, and it's a sight gag. You need the sight for the sight gag to work. You need some kind of frame of reference. Yeah. Like in the TV show, right? When you don't know what's up with Eugene yet, and Jesse's going up the stairs, there's the ominous music building.
Mm.
And he opens the door, and he's just like, hey, preacher!
Yeah.
That was great.
And I think that was really well done, the way they did that in the show.
And then they faked you out with that later on, where they did the same thing, and I thought it was going to be a gag, but then it was burnt up Cassidy acting really scary.
Oh, yeah. Christ, yeah.
And so while all this is going on, well, I was scrolling down, is that you have Jesse, Cassidy, and Tulip hanging out in the bar talking, and then at one point, basically it's implied Jody and TC are in there, and they play that stupid song on the jukebox, they got lucky that jukebox had that song on it. And so they're still following him around, and then they end up getting into a bar fight with some rednecks outside. And meanwhile, the Saint has kind of shown up in a truck stop bar further along, and he shot and killed a guy, and he asks for some whiskey, and he eventually slaughters everyone in there. Well, and then back at, the other bar, they get into a fight with a bunch of rednecks and beat them up. But that's when they find out Cassidy is a vampire because he's just munching on that guy's neck.
Which, again, recreates the moment in the comic pretty much.
And although the funniest thing about that moment in the comics could not be done in a movie, because the way that's revealed is it's a full-page panel of Cassidy drinking this guy's blood, and then it says in the caption, next, because it's the end of the issue, it says, next issue, interview of the bastard.
Yeah, that you couldn't do that really in a movie.
And they get into a fight over this, and then Jesse calls Cassidy an abomination. Cassidy drives off in his pickup truck. And so they're kind of left behind there. And then we get the thing, I think this is where it happens, where like Jody and TC fucking like, they fucking drive by and drop the deputy's body with a preacher's collar on it as like some sort of half-assed intimidation tactic.
Yeah, it's just kind of pointless.
And that's where it all ends, I guess. That's where it's revealed that they're Jody and TC. Jesse and Tulip check into a motel just down the road, and that's where we get sort of them explaining their sort of backstory together, that they were criminals together. She explains that she did the hit, and then he explains that he was basically coerced into leaving her by Jody and TC. Leaving her without a word, and that he got forced back into it. And he's saying that even after his grandmother is dead, she still holds an influence over him, which she shouldn't be dead, and they shouldn't be here. It's weird how this sets off my comic purist sense more than the TV show does.
It's true,
like,
yeah.
It's like I'm more annoyed by these changes because A, I don't think there's enough story here for a movie, and what they do change is kind of dumb.
Yeah, and again, the fact that it's written by Ennis kind of makes it even weirder.
Yeah, it's odd, and so he ends up, and so they get over their differences, and they're back together right there. Now, in the comics, they're on the outs for quite a while, until well into the second trade paperback, and then they don't get back together until after that incident on Grandma's farm. Or maybe it was right before that. I can't, because he doesn't actually explain what happened to her until they're tied up and they've been given a certain amount of time left over. And he basically they're given a certain amount of time together before the family does something. I won't quite say what it is. And he explains his entire backstory to her. And it's one of the most lyrical, kind of sadly tragic kind of things, which this script kind of botched, if I'm being honest.
Oh yeah, the script completely made it either ridiculously comical with the bad guys, horrible, but like it almost feels over-exaggeratedly horrible, you know?
Yeah.
It's just a whole botch all the way around, really.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of back and forth going on here, where you have Meeker and Dennings investigating the bar fight, and then they tell Root about it, and they're about to head off to the truck stop because they've gotten word of what the Saint's doing there. There's a lot of back and forth with those characters that you could have cut out.
And even then, it's the fact that even now, with all this padding, there's still not enough here for a film.
Yep, and okay, so in the motel, Jesse looks into the mirror on the medicine chest, and he gets basically the full vision of Genesis's conception. And there's actually a good change here, because what causes him to have that vision is that he bangs his head on the medicine chest after he washes his face in the sink.
Right.
He's like, oh, that blow to the head is just what it needed. Yeah, no.
No.
And you have a bit, I can't remember if it was earlier or not, but he's talking to Tool about the name Genesis, and she talks about how, it's like the creation of something new. And it happened earlier in the comic where she says, it's like the first book of the Bible, or creation, or the birth of something new. And then Cassidy chimes in and says, a fucking terrible band.
Yeah.
Which is a very Cassidy Ennis thing to say.
Didn't they do a similar joke about in the TV show?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, what, like the bandmate? Or something like that when they say Genesis for the first time.
Something like that.
And this keeps going, and there's a little bit of back and forth, and then Cassidy, who's driving around, he's drawn by the smell of blood to the truck stop, where he finds the Saint of Killers and the massive pile of bleeding bodies. Now, this is a bit different in the comics, because in the comic, there was a cop outside the truck stop, and he said, if you run for your gun or anything, I'm going to turn this into a massacre. And he says to Cassidy, I'm just keeping my word. And here it's this weird thing that he specifically drew Cassidy out because he knew that Cassidy was a vampire from first sight. And then he says this thing about how, isn't it kind of weird that you just got this sudden feeling like you had to drive to Texas? It's like you got, implying that he got drawn to Genesis and that it will draw other kind of supernatural creatures, which is not from the comic, and it's not a bad idea, but it doesn't hold up to scrutiny when precisely one supernatural thing showed up that wasn't connected or tied in somehow in the first place.
Yeah, it gives, obviously, Cassidy a justification for showing up in the story, but then it opens up other plot holes that don't really make much sense.
And so what he does is that he threatens Cassidy with permanent death from his... He threatens to shoot him, and Cassidy, who actually has heard of the Saint of Killers, I think he mentions in this draft.
Yeah, yes, he did.
Yeah, and which is an interesting idea. You've been like a person who has to kill living long enough, you would have heard about him. Which is a thing in the comics, because he is like a figure of folklore. In fact, the miniseries that details his backstory is framed with like an older hitman telling a neophyte in the profession this story, which is a really interesting way to frame it. But no, what he does is that he coerces Cassidy into calling Jesse, which, first off, how did he know the number to the motel?
That's a good point.
And how, because I mean, and the call doesn't happen in the comics either. He just says, tell me where he is, and Cassidy says no and gets shot.
Yeah.
And then so he calls him and says, no, run, Jesse, because the Saint says, tell him to come back to Anvil and I'll answer all his questions about what's going on. And then Cassidy goes, no, Jesse gets a trap, and he gets shot twice with the bullets. Which
really makes no sense.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where he does get shot in the comics by the Saint, but even then, Garth Ennis has said that that's one thing he would change if he was writing it over again, because he hadn't quite figured out how the Saint worked yet.
Oh, I see.
And he does mention his backstory. He does briefly mention his backstory, although he says instead of, because he got the guns from Satan in the comic, it's a little more complicated than that, because the Angel of Death didn't want the job anymore. Here he says it was God.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting change. And I still say he should have written that out, because by this point, 2 years into the run, he probably should have figured out how the guns work.
Yeah, very true. I mean, he says he made a mistake, and yet he still made the same mistake.
Of course, that could have been something that he didn't think of until much, much later in terms of regretting it.
I guess.
But okay, so Cassidy does come back, and he drinks all the gooey, coagulating blood off the floor, which is just, ugh. And it randomly fades out and then fades back in the middle of that, which I do not understand. But Jesse, knowing it's a trap, he does decide to go back there anyways, and they like hotwire a truck and then drive off. And then Root shows up and then figures out where they were going by talking to the clerk. Now this is something that's actually fairly different, is that the confrontation happens right outside the motel, the big final confrontation between Jesse, the Saint, and then Cassidy showing up, and Root, and Arseface, who has been peddling after Root to follow his father in the script, but he hides in the back of the car in the script. They're all there in the same place outside the motel, and that's where it ends. Yes, and this is just trying to give it a bigger climax. And so Jesse drives back to Anvil, and Root, knowing that Anvil is where they're going to be, like, orders all the cops back there. And then Meeker and Dennings are like, what the fuck is he doing? And that's the last relevant thing they do in this script.
Yeah, pretty much. They just kind of disappeared.
Your mic's sounding a bit off.
I had to change the headphones. The other ones kind of crapped out on me. Sorry.
Okay, that's no fine. That's fine. I can cut that out.
Okay.
But yeah, they really don't do it. Like, really, the only significant thing is that he mentions that Root is compensating because of all the shit that's happened with him, and because he has a 2-inch dick.
Yeah, and then he admits that he slept with his wife or something.
Which, that was a funnier joke in the comic, because in the Arseface backstory, when his wife leaves him, she leaves him like the breakup letter, and that just says, P.S. I lied, 3 inches is below average. It was a lot funnier there. But...
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's there's a lot of poor execution on things that might have worked better if they'd have been thought out differently, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's trying to still be the first comic arc whilst trying to be different, and it doesn't quite work.
Exactly.
I think it needed an actual screenwriter to help him out.
I think with this script, if he did, like, it's okay, he wrote it, right?
Yeah.
But I think if he then passed it off to someone to do a rewrite of it, that could have helped significantly.
Which I'll bring it up later, but I have seen references to rewrites of this script by other writers.
Right, okay.
But yeah, so yeah, that happens, and basically everybody converges on Anvil. The town gets evacuated, so this is not a Man of Steel situation. Or a Superman flyby situation, for that matter, which is the J.J. Abrams script, which in the first 5 pages there's mention that half of South America is on fire. But again, enough about predicting future episodes.
Yes.
But so yeah, what happens is that they get there, the Saint Killer shows up on the other side of town and starts killing all the cops. And while that's going on, Jesse and Tulip arrive. Rude arrives. They have a bit of a fight. Tulip runs off, and Jesse manages to knock him out and shove him through the car window. So he's out until the very end.
Yeah.
And then as Tulip's running away, she sees the van, and she ends up running away from TC in the grocery store and then killing him. It's just not very good, because TC felt like he had more of a point in the comic. Like, she is the one who fights and kills him, but they did more to earn that in the comic. And I'll talk about that when we talk about the August script, because there's a comic spoiler, which I think might get brought into the TV show, and I won't talk about it till then, because they kind of do it in that script.
Okay, that's interesting.
But there's a big dramatic build-up to her killing him.
Yes.
Which isn't here. Instead, it's just them running around through the grocery store, and then she sets his dick on fire.
Yeah, and a lot of it is just, it's very easy to miss because you just skim through a lot of it.
And in the rewrite, I very much skimmed through that because of how close it was.
Indeed.
But no, and I'm like, and of course he has buckshot in his pockets, which makes it even worse. I'm like, thanks, Ennis, you found another form of castration for your goddamn fetish.
That's true.
He even brings chemical castration into the comics and completely doesn't understand how it works. But yeah, so you have that happening, and then in the back street, Jesse is fighting Jody, and there's a moment in here which is almost great, because it's a moment from the comics I really liked where they're fighting, and Jody says, "You could use that thing on me, but you won't." And he says, "There's hope for you yet."
Okay.
Which I thought was a strong moment, because it's this weird sort of almost paternal thing, because in his own kind of fucked up way, he did sort of raise Jesse.
Yeah. Like,
their relationship has a teeny tiny little bit more going on for it in the comic, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I think I think we've said that enough, that the comic version is much better.
In fact, there's this thing I found really interesting in the comics, which he says something which is one of the most telling things about his character, where he says, "I don't understand what Jesse is so upset about. He got it way easier than I did."
Yes.
Which suggests so much about his relationship with Marie.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And really makes you wonder what his purpose was and what happened between them. It really does make you wonder. But no, that's all gone, and so they fight, and he eventually kills him. I don't even want to go into the details. That just goes on forever.
Yeah.
And so you have a shitload of fight scenes piling up on top of each other. And then you have Tulip running into the Saint Killers and just unloading on him with 2 guns, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. It was alright.
It was alright, but then he gets her dead to rights with his gun against her head, and he tells Jesse, basically, "If you even so much as open your mouth to speak, I will kill her. So just come over here, and I'll take care of you." And then that's when Tulip says you were supposed to give him answers, and he says, "I don't have any answers. You'll have to ask who hired me. Ask the angels." And then this basically is where Cassidy comes in and kind of saves the day by crashing the truck into the Saint, and it bends around him, and he doesn't even move.
Which, is that in the comics? I do remember.
It is. It is in the comics, except it happens at the motel instead of in the town. And it is a really cool moment, and this is the most fucking stupid thing that happens in this is that this distracts the Saint long enough that Jesse reaches into his coat and pulls the gun out and then shoots him and kills him with it.
Which is such a pathetic end.
Yes, he goes out like a punk bitch.
It really is. I mean, you have to admit, possibly one of the coolest characters in all of Preacher.
In all of comics.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going that far.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just, what a pathetic waste. Pointless waste of character.
Yeah, why even... Yeah, it's basically taking away any possibility of future storylines involving him.
Yeah, he could have done so much better with it, frankly. I don't understand why he chose to do that.
And he plays a huge part in the ending. I mean, the comic wouldn't end the way it does without the Saint of Killers hanging around. So I don't understand that choice.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
I don't even want to say it's just such a... It's one of the most badass, insane, holy crap, I can't believe that happened things a character has ever done in a comic.
Right, okay. That makes me very intrigued.
And and making it just what this script does is that it makes the Saint into just another bad guy for Jesse to deal with. When in the comics they end up kind of having sort of a mutual respect for each other by the end.
Yeah.
And they end up having kind of similar aims. The way, because he starts off as this antagonist who's just chasing him down, but then Jesse finds something out that kind of, changes, and he gains a certain amount of respect for Jesse. And it's just kind of And so, Saint is dead, and then we get 10 more pages where Jesse calls down an angel who's in this great, huge sort of overblown form saying, "Behold the glory of the Lord," and he tells him to cut the shit. And then it just becomes like the regular angel we've already seen before. Now I really like how it's described in the rewrite where he's dressed like a marketing rep.
Oh yeah, that was pretty good.
Or a sales rep or something like that. And he explains what Genesis is, where it came from, that it's the product of the union between an angel and a demon, and that it has no sentience or consciousness of its own, and so it had to bond with someone to give it a will and a purpose and a direction. And they don't really know why it latched on to Jesse.
Yeah.
And then he finds out, he says, "Oh, how could God let something like this happen?" And that's when he twigs that something's wrong and then makes him spill the beans. He says, "God is missing. Since Genesis was born, he straight packed up and left and fucked out of there." And that gets Jesse really pissed off and says, "What's he doing abandoning us? I'm going to go find him." And that sets up basically the arc of where I'm assuming the sequels would go. And we get a little tag at the ending where Arseface is pedaling up on his bike and he asks for directions about where his father is. And Jesse, in a rather cold way, really cold and heartless for him, says "Oh yeah, he's just lying up the road with his dick in his ass," and then drives away, and it's a really abrupt ending.
Yeah, that felt really out of character for me.
In the comics, he says he didn't he hadn't quite had the grasp of his powers yet, and so he didn't realize that. Oh, I forgot to mention, he pops up right at the end, and Jesse tells him, "Just go fuck yourself."
Yeah, and in the comics, it's he tells him that, not knowing you'd take it literally.
Yeah, he hadn't quite figured out how the powers worked yet.
Exactly.
And he explains that to Arseface later on. Here, he's just "Oh yeah, that happened. Yeah, I'm going to torment this poor kid."
And the fact that is exactly where the film is supposed to end is wow, that's just really shit.
It's like the Sopranos ending.
Yeah.
Or the Lost ending, even. Or hell, the season 1 finale of Better Call Saul, where it felt like not much was accomplished.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, that's this script, and I think we can overall say we weren't terribly impressed with it.
No, it's dull, and
it went on too long. And it tried to do things that just better in the comics. You just might as well just have the comic instead. Yeah, you might as well it's so close to the comics, you might as well just read them. Now the second draft I have that we read is undated, and I'm assuming it's later because it's shorter, and generally drafts get shorter as they go along.
Yeah, it's been trimmed down, and they've taken out a lot of the flack, really.
And in the tags, when I got it, it says production draft, even though that's not on the title page. So I'm assuming this is the version they kind of slapped together as the final version at that time.
Yeah.
And so the big changes is that it adds a wraparound story, a framing device with Cassidy narrating to the audience.
Which is just really cheesy.
It's really stupid. And he has this bit where it's talking about all this weird stuff that happens, and then he goes, even vampires, can you believe that? And I'm like, ha ha ha, fuck you.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The big difference is that Jesse's background, the whole thing with Grandma and Jody and TC, isn't in this draft. In fact, that's not even part of his backstory in this draft, because that's completely changed. And, like, it starts off with Jesse and Tulip arguing in the church, and some of her dialogue from the motel scene has been moved forward to there.
Yeah.
And she's arguing about, why did you leave me, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, I can't tell you, and it doesn't make any sense why you can't tell her in this version.
No, because, you know, it's implied, I think, in the first version that they were going to kill her.
Yeah, he says if you do anything to alert her to what's going on, we will kill her. We'll blow her head clean off.
That's right. But when you got rid of that, you just opened up a new plot hole that made no sense.
And so, and like one of the smaller changes I noticed is that they leave out the part when he's ranting at his congregation. They leave out the rapists.
Yes.
Which that just feels like pussying out, I guess.
Yeah, I can understand why, but it's like ultimately pointless when you think about it. Considering some of the stuff that was left in.
Yeah, I mean, it actually, and it's something that works because it's not a far out thing. What they talk about is that they raped a hitchhiker and then their father paid off the judge.
Yeah.
That's a deeply disturbing thing that probably happens all the time.
And
it fits what they're talking about.
Yeah, and it really emphasizes what Anvil is all about, I think.
And why Jesse is so dispirited and alcoholic at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine spending an entire season of a TV show on this Anvil.
I don't think you could do that. People would just be like, oh, this is just awful.
This is way too depressing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there's that, and then it's Tulip driving her pickup truck, and she hasn't met up with Cassidy yet. And so she drives back to pull Jesse out of the wreckage specifically, and then they're stopped at a gas station, and then Cassidy just kind of wanders out of the desert and steals the truck.
Yeah.
And I like how he says, I've been on a whole bunch of adventures, I don't have time to tell you what this is.
Yeah, like there was another movie we just completely missed out on.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But I feel like introducing him late, well, it might help the structure a bit better. I don't think the character relationships work.
No, I think you needed a little bit longer because it's a really unconventional relationship the way these three have, and I think you need to establish that really early on to get maximum screen time with it. Especially because like halfway through the script they split up again.
Yeah.
So it's even less time.
And it doesn't really make sense why Cassidy would be so torn up over betraying Jesse to the Saint.
Exactly.
Or why he would risk getting killed by him to say, hey, I don't know shit about where they are.
Yeah, because let's be honest, I believe Cassidy would do that for a friend, but not someone he just met. You know, so.
Which, granted, that is kind of in the comics, but they spend a lot more time kind of sitting around talking to each other in the comics.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, so that happens, and when he tries to steal the truck, that's what leads to the cops surrounding them. And also, I mentioned earlier that Jesse got his new clothes off screen. And what happens is that when Cassidy drives away after their argument, it's him stealing Tulip's truck again, and she's pissed off about that.
Yeah.
And this is where the really big change is. Now, Tulip still has, when they're in the motel, they're talking about the backstory. Tulip still has the thing about being a hit woman that didn't work out. And Jesse's backstory is that, all right, they were still car thieves together. Only while they're in Phoenix, what happens is she's out shopping, and he gets word that his father is sick and dying of cancer back home. And so, because he apparently can't take the hour or so to find her and tell her what's going on, because that hour is just he could possibly die in an hour, I guess. I mean, so he goes back home.
So I was going to say, I can understand it, but it is a very far-fetched.
It's a little on the far-fetched side. So he goes back, sees his father dying of cancer, and this kind of causes a twinge of guilt in him because he knows that like his amoral lifestyle has deeply hurt his father, who was a preacher like his father was before him. So he promises him on his deathbed that he will go and try to run his church the best he could. which kind of sounds like the TV show a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
Seth Rogen, did you read this? Tell me. Come on. Come on, you can let me know, man. I won't tell anyone other than my listeners. All 2 people who voted on my Twitter poll. But, and what I don't get is he even says he had ample opportunity to call her and tell her what happened.
Yeah.
But for reasons that don't make a whole lot of sense, he doesn't. Like, he doesn't want her to understand. And I'm like, this Tulip seems like a person who she loves you enough that I think she would be willing to settle down and do this if you think you have to. I don't think it would hurt her that much, because if your father was a preacher and his father was before, then this isn't the celibate kind of preacher.
Yeah, exactly. It's all very, very contrived.
It just doesn't work. Now everything else is pretty much the same, except, since Jodie and TC aren't here, they don't show up for the big climax. So it's just one fight with Root, which ends with Jesse telling him to go fuck himself, and then the confrontation with the Saint of Killers, which is still stupid.
Yeah, and pathetic.
And then the ending, and then it ends with another bar scene with Cassidy, and that's about it. Now, the one change I did like in the ending was the, like I said, the angel being described as like an ad executive who doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah,
that felt very preacher-like.
But yeah, that was pretty cool. I mean, that's those 2 Ennis drafts. I almost said pretty cool because I'm so used to saying that on this show. But I mean, that was the Ennis drafts. Overall, you can say we don't really care for them.
No. I mean, it's ironic because, he's the writer of the comic, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah, it just doesn't. Now, if this had been much, much shorter and was a pilot episode, it would work a lot better.
Yeah, or maybe if you took out a lot of the flack and made them 2 episodes.
Yeah, that. And I used to think, like, when I was first reading the comic, how could you turn this into a movie? Because I tend to think that when I read stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Like, it's just part of, how my brain works. I'm glad I'm not the only one. But I was thinking, like, you could take that Gone to Texas story, really reduce it down, and then make the heart of it the stuff with Jesse's grandmother, and then somehow tie Sheriff Root into it, that he follows them to the farm or something. And I was like, no, that'll never happen. Then the TV show got announced. And so I'm kind of seeing, those 2 stories connected, just not in a good way. So it's kind of undermining and confirming my own ideas at the same time. It's really quite bizarre.
It is very strange.
So to get into what happened with this version is that the script was completed, and then they had trouble finding investors because of the religious controversy it would entail. I mean, look at all the controversy that got stirred up around Dogma, which is honestly kind of tame with the religious stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's honestly pretty God and Jesus positive when you think about it, while still being critical of religion, of organized religion.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, bringing up Kevin Smith, they got, Ennis approached Kevin Smith and Scott Mosier I'm reading off of Wikipedia, to help finance the film under the View Askew banner. And then Smith and Mosier, they pitched it to the Weinsteins. And what happened was that, Bob Weinstein was confused by the characterization of Jesse, which, going by these scripts, I completely understand.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
And they ultimately ended up dropping it because they didn't want to share the box office money with Electric Entertainment, which is the independent company which bought the rights.
Right, okay.
So it fell apart at Miramax. And then in 2000, there was a UK-based company called Storm Entertainment, which is another independent company, joined the production, and they were co-producing it. And then they announced it greenlighted for pre-production, and then it was still going to be Ennis' script. And sometime around 2001, I think, because I've read an Ain't It Cool review of another draft, which is credited to Ennis with revisions by Rachel Talalay and Chris Donaldson. So she was still attached.
Yeah.
And apparently that changed things even more. It brought back in the Jodie and TC element, but it took place on Grandma's farm at the end. So I'm guessing that brought some more comic book stuff in, and this kept going for a while, and then in 2002, they had a $25 million projected budget, and that caused budget issues, which is why it kept getting pushed back. And in 2002, James Marsden was cast as Jesse Custer.
Which is kind of wrong, really.
It feels wrong, because I don't really know everything I've seen him in, it's not that he's a bad actor, it's that he consistently gets overshadowed by everyone else.
Yeah, he's very bland.
And I don't even know if it's so much that as it is just the way the films were cut. Because, I mean, his Cyclops had some kind of decent moments in the first movie, but he just got continuously pushed into the background to focus on Wolverine. So we never really got an idea of his Cyclops. Yeah,
and I think a lot of the time it's a case of it's good, but everything else around him is just better.
Yeah, and I just don't really, because, I mean, we never really saw a whole lot of his Cyclops.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I'm mainly familiar with him from is Superman Returns.
Yeah.
Which, you were in a fairly prominent role in a big superhero movie, and you take that pointless character, the guy who was the second choice to Superman.
Yeah.
Who's raising Superman's date rape love baby.
Oh, Christ, yeah.
Which I'm only saying date rape because of that Kevin Smith bit where he was talking about how, because he was trying to connect it back to Superman 2 and the amnesia kiss, and she should have been at the end of Superman Returns going like, when did you rape me, Superman? Because I don't remember us fucking ever. I gotta look that one up because it turns into a Star Trek conversation, which is hilarious.
Right.
But yeah, so he was still attached up until 2004, and he mentioned in March of that year that they were hoping to film that August. And then eventually it just kind of fell apart because of budgetary problems.
Right.
Like we said, I don't think you could really do this as an indie film.
No, it needs budget, really.
I mean, unless you're going to make the effects intentionally comedic.
Which would be bad.
Which in that case, you're just turning into the Asylum.
Yeah, there's just no way.
At that point, you might as well cast Tommy Wiseau as Jesse Custer.
God.
No, Assface, I did not kill him. I did not. It's bullshit.
God, I hate that.
Oh, hi, Tulip.
God.
I've never seen it, but I am looking forward to The Disaster Artist.
Right, yeah.
That looks funny as hell. Seth Rogen, too. But yeah, but no, cut to 2006, and HBO announced that they were going to produce a pilot written by Mark Steven Johnson. Now, if that name sounds familiar...
Yes.
It's because he wrote and directed Daredevil, which the director's cut I think is actually pretty good in an underrated movie, and I never hated the theatrical version.
Oh, yeah.
It's not spectacular, but it's watchable. And then he later got his second chance with Ghost Rider and fucked it up.
Oh, Jesus. I mean, that's like nearly reaching a high and then just plummeting.
Because, I mean, the Daredevil director's cut is a solid film, and then Ghost Rider is just, ugh.
Absolutely awful, yeah.
I mean, Nicolas Cage can't even make that movie.
No.
Talk about shitty cartoony villains, too. God damn.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they make the worst of the MCU look like, I don't know, fucking, Iago.
Yeah.
But Johnson wrote a pilot script, and HBO really liked it, and they had him write the series Bible, and his plan was to turn each comic book issue into a single episode on a shot-for-shot basis. Ugh.
That's an interesting idea.
I don't think I would like that.
No.
Especially since, I'd have to sit through a goddamn season's worth of that New Orleans arc. Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. And that just makes me wonder how they would fit in stuff like the Saint of Killers miniseries. I mean, would they do it as cold opens like the TV show did? It's
possible, but then again, maybe they weren't really thinking that far ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that would have worked, and Garth Ennis actually told them he says, you don't have to be so beholden to the comic. And Steven Johnson said, no, it's got to be like the comic.
That's such a weird thing to restrict yourself like that.
And apparently they did start conceiving of new storylines for the show, and Ennis was helping work on that. But then eventually what happened is that in 2008, there was a changeover in executives at HBO, and the new people didn't like the idea, and they thought it would be too controversial.
Ugh. How ironic for HBO.
Yeah, it has boobs out. I mean, goddamn, they get controversy that doesn't even make any sense nowadays, like the whole Sansa Stark rape thing. Oh no, we can't have rape in the thing ever because our sensitive ears can't handle it. It's not even on screen.
Yeah.
Dumbass internet people.
Weird.
I feel like turning into, because in the Preacher comic, right, there's a big scene of Jesse Custer ranting against the whole PC thing, which is very 90s.
Yeah.
And was actually starting to feel kind of dated a while ago, but it's kind of relevant again now. But it's like, I kind of feel like I'm turning into that guy.
Yeah.
Because you have because there's a bit where he's listening to the radio, and this isn't really a spoiler, but it's like this talk show, and you have like this right-wing stereotype making arguments and this left-wing feminazi stereotype making her arguments. He calls into show and uses the word and says, just tell us what you really want. And she says, cock, I want cock. And in a very low, quiet voice, the guy says, I want cock too.
Now that's a good joke. I like that.
Yeah, that is hilarious. And there's a bit where Jesse just starts ranting in the car about PC, and then it turns into it just goes on to all these different topics that have nothing to do with anything. He just goes, man, I need to get laid. But no, and then, okay, after the HBO version fell apart, it got picked up by Columbia Pictures, so we get the Hollywood version, and this is in 2008, and Sam Mendes signed on to direct, and he wanted to do this as his follow-up to Revolutionary Road.
That's a weird follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, Sam Mendes is known for his indie dramas, like
I guess.
American Beauty, which also ties into Ghost Rider, because Wes Bentley. And I mean, I can kind of see it, because American Beauty does have that kind of weird offbeat feel to it.
Yeah, I guess.
And I could see him maybe casting Chris Cooper as the Saint of Killers.
Anything's possible.
Maniacal laugh. But what's weird about it is that, okay, the Columbia version, okay, that's the next script we're going to be talking about, written by John August. What's weird is that they apparently started working on it in 2008, but the draft didn't finish until 2010.
Yeah, wow.
And, okay, to look at John August's IMDb page, okay, he has a bunch of short films. He worked on Titan AE.
Oh, dear.
Which I don't hate that movie, but I haven't seen it since I was 10. And Joss Whedon co-wrote that. He has a writing credit on Charlie's Angels.
Okay.
Charlie's Angels Full Throttle.
Oh, Jesus.
And a whole bunch of Tim Burton stuff, basically. Okay, Big Fish, which I think is really good. That's one of Tim Burton's best movies post the 90s.
Right.
There's a TV movie called Alaska in here, which I don't know anything about.
No.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which is okay.
Which version is that?
The Johnny Depp, Tim Burton version?
Oh, no. Fuck that. No, shit.
I don't hate it as much as most people do. I just don't care. I mean, I'll watch it and I'm like, it was there. The Christopher Lee cameo is kind of cool. But other than that,
yeah.
God rest his soul, that guy. I swore for a long time I thought that guy was going to live forever because he just didn't die.
Yeah, it's true.
And next up is Corpse Bride, which I don't remember much about, but...
No, me neither.
But I remember it being alright.
Yeah.
And that the stop-motion Johnny Depp looked just like Johnny Depp. And there's this other thing he wrote here called The Nines, which he also directed.
Oh, I've seen that. That's an interesting film.
Yeah, it's I read about it on IMDb, and it's like Ryan Reynolds playing 3 different characters.
Yeah, it's very kind of, I mean, not to sound too poncy, but it is very existential and kind of mind-bending. It's an interesting story, to be honest.
Yeah, it sounded interesting. And next up, he has a story credit on the Tim Burton Dark Shadows.
Ugh. No.
Which, who knows how much of his version ended up in the movie? Because, I mean, the final screenplay was written by Seth Grahame-Smith, whom I read 2 of his books, which I liked, but I've not liked any of the stuff he wrote for film. So.
Yeah.
And I got about maybe halfway into Dark Shadows, and I just didn't care, and I turned it off. So it was another movie I nothinged.
Yeah, well, I forced my way through that, but I can totally understand you just not bothering.
Well, I was watching it with the family, and we stopped watching it. We're going to continue it the next night, and we just decided not to.
Good call.
Yeah, and then also Frankenweenie, which I heard that was good.
Yeah, I hear several different opinions, to be honest.
But I actually heard that movie wasn't bad. I mean, at least he didn't write Alice in Wonderland.
True.
And next up, this is in pre-production, but he's written the screenplay for the Guy Ritchie live-action Aladdin.
Oh, God. Not another one from Guy Ritchie.
Can't be much worse than King Arthur. And I was more middle of the road on that movie because at least Charlie Hunnam and Jude Law were good in that.
Right.
Jude Law gets to be fucking cold as hell, and that's great. Like, Jude Law's a great bad guy.
Yeah.
But it's not a good movie.
No.
And it's not as bad as Michael Bay's take on King Arthur.
Well, yeah, but that's
which is in the worst movie of the year so far, I maintain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, if you haven't watched my review, The Last Night fucking sucks, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But okay, so that's John August's, that's his filmography. Seems like an odd fit for Preacher.
Yeah, well, to be honest, with something like The Nines, honestly, I can see it.
And you can kind of see it, because, I mean, reading the script, you can tell he read the comics, because there's all these kind of obscure references.
Yeah, he's definitely done his homework.
Almost too much. Now, this script on the whole, I think, is a better script.
Mm.
And I'd say, aside from a few really nagging things that he does, which is all over this thing, so they're a bigger deal than it sounds, it's a better adaptation.
Yes.
Because it actually feels like a movie. It has a movie structure.
Yeah, it's better paced, better structured, and everything connects a lot better than what Ennis did.
And yeah, it actually feels like something is accomplished.
Exactly, yeah. And it actually has a decent climax, kind of.
Kind of. It has a decent climax, and then it keeps going and has a really needless 20-minute climax after that.
Yeah.
And the stupid ending.
Mm.
But to keep going, I guess we should start off on at the beginning on this one. I feel like we can sum this one up fairly quickly.
Yeah. I mean, what's the weirdest part for me after watching the TV show is that it starts off with a voiceover from someone called DeBlanc,
who is one of the angels in the comic.
Exactly, and obviously, if you've seen the TV show, he's in that too.
Not anymore.
Well, not anymore, no, but he's still in the first season.
Yeah, that actor was awesome. I love those two characters in the TV show. And I think they're better than their comic book counterparts because their comic books were just kind of irreverent angels.
Yeah, they actually have personality in the TV show.
Who tells this, and DeBlanc tells the Seraphim to go fuck themselves, basically. Yeah. And they get cast out of heaven and they end up on Earth snorting coke. And that's really it.
Yeah. So yeah, but it's weird how in this script you've got DeBlanc giving this, basically starting out with giving the backstory on the Saint.
Yeah, and it's actually very close to the Saint's backstory.
Very close.
Very close to the comic. Closer than the TV show is because the TV show couldn't afford a Storm budget.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, it's basically the comic book backstory, frame for frame, and then because like, okay, he's setting out to town to get medicine, but he gets delayed by bandits, basically.
Yeah.
And his horse gets killed, and so he gets back, and his family has died, and so this completely destroys whatever humanity he had left, because he was not a very nice person beforehand. He was a fighter in the Civil War who loved the killing.
Mm.
And then, but he met this woman who kind of reformed him, and then he lost all that, and so he lost whatever humanity he had gained back. And it's really quite tragic. It's very, it's like a really fucked up version of Unforgiven.
Mm-hmm.
With
Definitely.
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
It's very similar, but even Clint Eastwood in that is not this far gone.
Mm.
And then he goes and he gets killed before his revenge can be fulfilled, so he kills his way across hell. And then it says he swears to kill everyone up to and including God and the angels in heaven, and that this war started in Texas and it will end here.
Mm.
That seems to imply that just basically is setting up the Saint of Killers to be the big bad for movie one. Is kind of taking the onus off God.
True.
Because, okay, I thought reading this through the first time that what they were going to say is that God abandoned heaven because the Saint of Killers was out to get him.
I thought that as well.
But they don't really address the fact that God is not in heaven until, like, the last 2 pages.
Yeah, they barely mention it.
And so, okay, you get that whole backstory, and then you get a sort of compressed version of Jesse Custer's life, and, like, his grandmother is training him to be a child minister, which... I like that we see that he actually has to practice doing this.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really seem like he gets any kind of training other than they have him read the Bible.
Mm. Yeah, and he actually does, like, laying on hands and all this stuff.
And I thought that was an interesting take on it. Although the whole child preacher thing just gave me wicked bad flashbacks to all those shitty Children of the Corn movies.
Oh, God, that's true.
Because they really lean on that in the sequels.
Yeah.
Dear Lord. But no, he's learning to be a child minister. They're doing the fake laying on of hands thing, which I thought was amusing. Like, they're being hypocritical without even realizing it.
Yeah. It's like the end by the means.
And then he messes up and he doesn't remember to mention Hellfire, and so he gets punished by Jody.
Yes.
And we get a flashback of Jody killing his father, intercut with TC killing his best friend, the one-eyed kid, Billy Bob. Who, in this version, instead of seeing TC fuck a chicken, he finds a dead body, which is never really explained why there's a dead cop in the barn.
Yeah, I thought that was going to lead into something, but it's just he just kills the cop for some reason.
I think someone at Columbia said, leave out the bestiality.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Although it's not just bestiality with TC, I should mention there's an offhand reference because there's a one-shot which focuses on them, which is a hilarious spoof of action movies.
Right.
And there's an offhand mention to the fact that at Jesse's 10th birthday party, TC got up on the table and fucked the cake.
Right.
And I think that was written before American Pie came out, too.
Okay.
But no, the flashback of his father being killed, this one actually addresses the fact that he tried to escape and that they stopped him. I don't know why he had Jesse drive the car, but
yeah.
Well, I think it's because he had to push start it. Because you could do that at some point with cars. But okay, so we have Jesse trying to run away, but DeBlanc, whom we've been introduced to, he's in cahoots with Marie, and he was asking Jesse questions and talking about how the word is a great burden and that you need to be prepared because you've been chosen for something, which is a lot of chosen one bullshit that doesn't really pay off or get explained.
Yeah, there's always talk about destiny and all that, which is, I think, just the antithesis of what Preach is all about, really.
Yeah, it's not. It's the fact that he's just an ordinary guy who got this thing at random.
Yeah, that's important.
And that it's the summation of his life experiences that forms how he does.
Yeah.
How he uses Genesis and what he goes about doing is what Preacher is. And even though the TV show's taking a slightly different tack and changing the details, it's still doing that.
Yeah, so when you make it destiny, you kind of force characters into certain roles and they're not allowed to, evolve as characters, really. It's just, they were this, now they're this. It's kind of lazy.
And so, like, when he's a child, he tries to escape. He tries to run away, but then DeBlanc points him out. And also, he's described as wearing a fedora, which is just kind of funny, so I'm just imagining a neck beard.
Yeah.
He points him out, and then he ends up doing a week in the coffin. And I believe he was in the coffin before that, too, because of... I might be confusing a few things between drafts. But either way, he ends up in the coffin, and this is where we get introduced to his imaginary friend, the cowboy, who is John Wayne, essentially, which is from the comic.
Yeah.
And I think he's fairly well handled here.
Yeah, it was slightly confusing for me.
It was a little bit, even for me.
Having not read the comic or anything like that, it was slightly confusing because, is it real, is it not? I thought it was the Saint for some time. But
no. I'm not sure. Well, it's implied that it is just his imagination because in the comics, when he first meets the Saint, the cowboy, John Wayne was still alive.
Yeah.
So it's implied to be his imaginary friend. And so it kind of follows him around throughout the comic, and it kind of abandons him for a bit because it's disappointed in him.
Right.
But then it comes back. And so it's how he coped with losing his father and all this horrible shit that happened to him. It's by, imagining himself as being with John Wayne and trying to be John Wayne.
Yeah, which certainly makes a lot of sense.
And so basically John Wayne encourages him to escape, and he does escape somehow because apparently DeBlanc was just, looking the other way.
Yeah.
And so he makes as far as Durango, Colorado, where he meets Tulip in a bar, and that gets referenced back later as part of the Destiny thing, which makes no goddamn sense. It's just so stupid. He meets her in a bar, and there's this bit where he's explaining to this woman about how, because he dug up his father's cigarette lighter out of where he was buried, and it says "fuck communism" on it, and there's this thing where he's explaining about how it means that I don't like being told what to do by anybody, I'm my own man, blah blah blah, which comes back as a really forced character moment later on.
Yeah, and again, it's this forcing characters on a certain path in a very lazy way.
Yes, and he's explaining that. And so he meets up with Tulip, and they end up living together up here, and he ends up working on phone lines for a living. And I actually kind of like this. And As opposed, because I mean, in the TV show, they take the whole outlaw lifestyle and actually deal with the implications of that.
Yeah.
Whereas in the comic, it's like we're just supposed to like be okay with the fact that they steal cars for a living.
Yeah, because I think in the draft they're kind of driven to it in a way.
Yeah, in this draft, they're just living a normal life together.
Yeah, so it kind of, in my mind anyway, it kind of feels like I just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
She gets forced into a bit of a...
that's it, yeah.
A bit of a darker lifestyle as part of what happens.
Exactly.
And so they move in together, but DeBlanc actually does find him because he finally got off his ass. And then Jody and TC, they find him and coerce him into returning back to Texas to be a preacher because they threaten Tulip. And here specifically, they say TC's going to cut her tits off.
Yeah, which is a very Ennis kind of line as well.
Yeah. And so they get him to come back and they say that, okay, there's this new church in Annville and that's where you're going to go. And so he goes there. And the town is built in the shape of a bullseye with the church in the center. And oh my God, this shit happens on purpose. But no, he preaches there for 7 months. And he's preaching, I like how he's preaching like this really sort of subversive message of about how we've got to find all this stuff for ourselves, how we've got to question.
Yeah, I liked it because he accepted the fact that he was there and he had to be there. He still found ways to subvert that his own.
He made it his own.
Exactly.
And I'm like, I wonder if Grandma would approve of this.
Yeah.
And I should say, the characters of Grandma, Jody, and TC, they're not quite as disturbing as they are in the comic, but they get much closer to that here.
Yeah, it's a lot better than in the Ennis version anyway.
Where he focused on the cartoony aspects in that draft.
Exactly.
But no, it's set in the bullseye, and he preaches there for 7 months, and he talks about how blind faith is not enough.
Mm.
And then Genesis bursts into the church and merges with him and destroys the congregation, and he comes to and flees to a motel. And the cowboy tells him, you gotta call someone you can really talk to and understand, and he calls Tulip.
Yes.
And this is where it's sort of, because this thing is structured with it's got like act headings.
Mm.
Because like the first thing is it's like the preacher, and then the second one which starts here is the woman he left behind.
It's kind of similar to how in the TV show, like character names would be put on the screen, or
location names and
location names. It's kind of similar to that, really.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool. But no, and so this is where Tulip's part of the story starts. Like, she sends the call to voice message because she's doing this thing where she's working as kind of a vigilante, and she's going to this strip club in Houston because there's like some fucked up shit going on there, and this immigrant family, their daughter was killed by these people. And there's mention of this weird thing going on in the basement, which is where they really make their money. And so she decides to go in by faking to audition as a stripper, and she runs into Jesus Deusdaecon.
Yeah, which is as a name is kind of pretty ridiculous.
He's a comic book character too.
I know, but the name is just a bit...
Yeah, I don't even know why he's there in this draft. It's just a pointless reference. And in the comic, he's like this rich guy who holds like these big orgy drug parties.
Mm.
And it's really just an excuse for him to wander through this big orgy and see all this weird stuff happening. And it's implied all these rich and famous people are there, and he says to this woman you can't quite see, he says, hopefully later tonight you'll give me the privilege of urinating on your cleavage to me. Which is such a 90s thing.
Yeah, it and again, kind of Ennis-like as well.
And then it gets dark as Jesse walks into a back room and catches them setting up to film child porn.
Oh, yeah.
And he flies into a rage and just beats the fuck out of Deusdaecon.
Fair enough. Basically the Punisher.
But so he's the pawn shop guy.
Yeah.
I can make so many memes out of that if I wanted to. Hey man, I got a copy of The Last Night. But she's there, and she kills the guy in the back room, and she's going to try to escape out the back door, but it's blocked by some asshole parking in the alley.
Yeah.
And so she goes to the only place she can go, and that's in the basement. I'm not really sure how they made money off of this, but basically she finds Cassidy in pieces.
Still fine with it, as well.
Yeah, I don't really know how they made money off that.
No, they don't really explain what they were doing with him.
I'm guessing he was chained up and they were letting people cut him to pieces and do whatever.
Maybe.
And she finds his head in a box and she just helps him get put back together. And he just goes like, if you're wondering about my penis, it'll grow back.
Yeah.
And what's weird is that they rather casually mention his first name.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that. And I was like, really?
It's something they don't reveal in the comics until later, and it's just like it's revealed as like part of his backstory, and Jesse just asks about it, and it's a joke because it's a goofy sounding name, and I won't say what it is here in case of TV spoilers.
Yeah, but it is very odd
because it never really comes up in dialogue.
No, it's more for the reader than anything else.
And basically, Cassidy helps her get out of there by killing all the guys who are out to kill her.
Yeah.
And so I like how I found it interesting. This is another thing that kind of comes back in the TV show, that Tulip is aware of Cassidy's vampire status long before Jesse is.
Mm.
Which I don't know. I think that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? Okay. So yeah, they drive off and she finally, and this introduction also makes sense why he kind of has a thing for her.
Yeah.
A bit of a Stockholm syndrome thing.
It justifies that whole thing a bit more because, she saved him and all that, so he's kind of a bit more loyal to her.
Yeah, and in the comics, his whole crush on her comes so out of left field.
Right.
Like he just kind of partway at the beginning of the New Orleans arc, which I don't like, he just kind of drunkenly confesses his love to her, and then he wakes up the next morning and realizes what he does and goes, "I'm a wanker." And then it cuts to like a shot of the city skyline and just in a big word balloon, "I'm the biggest wanker in the world." That was funny.
Yeah.
But I feel like the TV show has done the best job of anything seeding the love triangles such as it is.
Yeah, it's sort of subtly weaved it, but it hasn't, allowed it to overshadow anything else.
Yeah, and they don't constantly talk about it all the time.
Exactly, yeah.
It's not Arrow.
Mm.
Yeah. But, so yeah, she gets Jesse's message, and she goes to see him, and they don't say where Anvil is in this draft, so I'm not going by the comics, but she gets there fast.
Yeah.
And they get there, and they immediately fall into bed, and Cassidy checks into the room next door, and they get surrounded by cops who have a legitimate reason for chasing after Jesse Custer because they think he's responsible for the church.
Mm.
And Root's there, and like, Arseface is like with him, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah, he's just in the back of the car, and there's no reason for him to be there.
He's just kind of there. It seems like they have a slightly better relationship than in the comics and the Ennis draft.
Yeah.
And I like how, when they're surrounding him, Jesse's like perfectly okay with being arrested. He doesn't turn on the cops until they go after Tulip.
Yeah, that I thought that was much better because it emphasized him as the main character in a way.
Yes, and when he uses Genesis, it gives off like a light which burns Cassidy, and that means he decides to stay behind and then immediately regrets it.
Again,
which is
justified.
Kind of forced, though.
It is kind of forced, but a little justified. Also, I should say, I did find it funny that when Cassidy is checking into a hotel, there's this whole long-running joke of him trying to get a room with drapes on the window.
Yes, which comes back in the TV show.
Yeah, I like that.
And also, like, the woman can't understand his accent, so I'm guessing this is Pilot Cassidy with his Lucky Charms voice. Because, I mean, you can't understand a single thing he says in that pilot.
Mm.
And also, he's the one who notices the cops are outside. He bursts his head through the wall to get their attention. Yeah. And, oh man, so Jesse and Tulip, they drive off, and Cassidy is still there when the Saint of Killers shows up looking for Genesis. Now, it's not explained how he knows what Genesis is, how he knows where to look for it. He just does.
Yeah. But I kind of like that as well.
But I don't understand how he knows about it, is the thing.
No, I mean, I kind of assumed that everything that happens in the comics still happened. We just didn't see it to keep us in the dark a bit.
But I don't really think that makes sense, considering he's got this war against God thing going, so the angels wouldn't go to him.
Let's be honest, it's not the best written script.
No, it's a better script than the Ennis script, but it could still use some work.
It has issues, as we've just discovered. Or at least I've just discovered.
Yeah, well, we've all discovered them.
Yeah.
You discovered quite a few while reading it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Saint of Killers just basically... The cops tell him which direction Jesse took off in, and then the Saint kills everyone, which... I mean, they're not really getting in his way. I don't think the Saint would do that.
He's much more kill crazy in this.
And he kills everyone, but Cassidy and Arseface somehow manage to get out of it. And Root dies here, and Arseface, of course, sees it happen. And so that's sort of his motivation for going along with Cassidy to help stop this guy.
Which I did like the sort of bizarre buddy road trip thing that accidentally happens.
Yeah, with Arseface and Cassidy. It's actually pretty cool.
One thing I do find quite irritating in this script, though, is that they don't actually explain what he's trying to say.
Yeah, but I figured it out pretty easily.
There was one or two that it took me a while to figure out what he was actually trying to say.
But yeah, and also apparently Cassidy can't drive, so Arseface has to drive the police SUV for him, which is kind of funny. And Cassidy actually knows the Saint by sight; he doesn't have to be clued into it.
Yes,
and I actually kind of like this subplot, even if it doesn't amount to a whole lot. This idea that there are people who know who the Saint is and are like his cult.
Yeah, that was an interesting idea. But like you said, it was pretty irrelevant for the most part.
Yeah. And I believe this is where the second act ends, and then the third act is Sons of Texas.
Yes.
And then Jesse has a dream with the cowboy unit talking about how train tracks only go from two directions, where you came from and where you're going. And this sort of gives him the idea to go, he has to go back to his grandmother's farm to try and get answers.
Which I don't quite understand his logic.
Because he says, well, they sent me to that place specifically. They must have known this was going to happen, which is part of the whole destiny thing.
Yeah.
And while this is, and he says that it's outside of salvation, which that's combining a couple things from the comics, because the farm is just Angelville in the comics, and Salvation is a different place where basically there's a big, like, holy shit story arc that happens, and then Salvation is like the breather where Jesse goes and he's the sheriff in this town for a while, and like the other two aren't in it for that part, and he's like cleaning up this town, and that's where Odin Kincannon comes into it in the comic.
Oh, really? So he's actually in it later on, much later on.
Yeah, he's in it much later on.
Oh, I did not know that.
And he's a very different character in that arc too.
Right.
And honestly, I can't say I'll miss that arc, because it really is just Jesse like takes 5 and goes and is a sheriff for a while.
Yeah, I can understand why they changed that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we were going to need like the big season-long break in the middle of it.
What is this, The Walking Dead?
Well, stuff actually happens in Preacher between the opening, the mid-season, and the finale. I've actually heard people say that you could actually skip all the episodes in between and you wouldn't miss anything in this last season. And while they're on their way to Salvation, Tulip gets visited by DeBlanc, who says that, you know, everything that happened was planned out and blah, 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 and you said that you got a phone call from a friend to go to this bar, and that's why you met Jesse Custer, but she didn't actually call you, so who did? And we need you to protect Jesse from corruption, because if he loses his moral sense, then, you know, the word could be used for evil or some such shit.
It doesn't make much sense.
This script feels like a bunch of random shit happens on accident, and then the idiot who caused it goes like, I did that on purpose.
Yeah. Pretty much. It is pretty much exactly like that.
And while this is going on, Cassidy and Arseface are driving to where they're going, and Cassidy explains that he wants to help Tulip because, like in Donkey Kong, he feels like he has to save the princess, and there's this flashback to him in the 80s playing the Donkey Kong arcade game, and oh my god, that was way too syrupy and...
Hollywood.
Not necessarily. It was... What the fuck was the word I used when we were talking off mic? God, it was way too cute and cuddly for Cassidy. Like,
yeah,
he is not this romantic of a guy at any point.
Well, it was just a bizarre aside that really didn't, you know, to have a bizarre reference to Donkey Kong in there for no real reason.
Yeah, that's just odd. I don't really get it. Like, suddenly we're Wreck-It Ralphing.
Yeah.
I don't know. But okay, so while that's going on, Jesse and Tulip approach Grandma's farm, but Jody and TC get to drop on them, and And Jesse gets shot up with tranquilizer darts, and Tulip gets subdued with a taser. And they get tied up in the barn, and we get a perspective where we can't see what Tulip is doing, but she's talking to someone and giving directions.
Yes.
And TC catches on and realizes that she's telling someone where they are, and she won't say.
Mm.
And so they shoot her in the head, and they kill her.
Which was surprising.
Okay, this is where I'm going to get into serious comic spoilers, which might show up in the show. They do actually kill Tulip in that story.
Yeah. I figured as much.
And I will get into how it differs, because that's the moment they get tied up in the bedroom together, and they give him like an hour to like get used to the fact that she's going to die because they think she's no good for him.
Right.
And so they're just going to kill her offhand.
Mm.
And that's when he explains the whole backstory about his parents and the grandmother and the coffin.
Mm.
And it's just this issues-long monologue, and it's just wonderful. No, so she's dead, and Jesse can't use the word because he's got a ball gag in his mouth, and which is Hennessy. But that's why he can't use the word in the comic. It's a different reason, but I'll get to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that happens, and then he gets forced into the coffin again by Jody, so he gets dropped at the bottom of the swamp. And so, okay, Cassidy and Arseface finally arrive at their destination, which is Boot Hill, the resting place of the Saint of Killers, which is described as being like a Burning Man for psychopaths.
Yeah.
Which is a really cool turn of phrase.
It was pretty appropriate, that one.
And Cassidy is looking for this guy called Coyote who can track people, essentially.
Well, before that, there was a nice moment where he tells Arseface that you can't cross through unless you killed someone, and he's like, I'm going through. And he just...
Yeah, because it exists in, like, the shadow realm between, the living and the dead, and he's able to walk through, and then we get the flashback to how he became Arseface.
Yeah.
And it's surprisingly dark.
Yeah, incredibly dark. Even
compared to the comics.
Yeah.
And when I first read this, season 2 hadn't started yet, so we didn't get the flashback, which explained what was going on. So I was thinking, man, this is kind of like what they did in season 1 of the TV show, where his backstory was really dark.
Mm.
But then we saw the truth of what happened, and it was actually darkly funny. Trying to shove brains back into someone's head does not work, Eugene.
Yeah, in the TV show, they go really, really kind on the guy.
Yeah, which I think is okay, considering I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm okay with it too. It didn't really affect me.
But no, the backstory, this is that him and his friend Pube, which really is what he calls himself in the comic, is that Pube has just gone nuts, and he's planning out a school shooting to the T.
Mm.
It's effective. I mean, it's an effective update. It doesn't involve Kurt Cobain, and then, Arseface, who's called Dickhead in the flashback, which I thought was kind of funny.
Yeah.
He really is not into this. It's really his friend's idea completely. So he just takes the shotgun and shoots him.
Mm.
Shoots him dead to stop this from happening. And then out of guilt, he tries to blow his head off, but it doesn't work. He flinches at the last second, and that's what makes him into Arseface.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that really makes you think about his character a little bit.
Yeah, it really gave his character this bizarre... I was very ambivalent towards his character, really. Because on one hand, you've got this, the horrible intentions, but then you've also got the result. It's very strange. It's very
whether it was his intentions or whether or not he was just such a doormat, he was just going along with his friend, and then he made his choice.
Mm.
I think that says something about his character, that he killed this guy to stop something from happening, but then still felt remorse.
Yeah, exactly. It is very interesting.
And so they're there, and he goes to Coyote, who's this weird cannibal guy who will who will track Tulip for Cassidy, but he wants to eat Arseface in exchange, which is really funny. And so he tracks Tulip, and you find out this is taking place at the same time that they're in the barn, and he's the one that she's talking to, and she gives him the directions to salvation, which doesn't really amount to much.
No, it actually does bugger all.
Sadly. And then he comes out of his trance, and it's like really trippy. He's getting high off his ass. But he comes out of it, and then he goes like, oh, you heard the part where I mentioned about the Saint of Killers coming after you, didn't I? And then Coyote tries to warn everybody, and then Cassidy basically bashes his brains in with a rock. And Arseface walks over and is like, what did you do? He's like, if it makes you feel any better, he was gonna eat you.
Yeah. That was good.
But he turns out he's not quite dead. In fact, he's slightly better. And he writes out salvation in the dirt before he dies, but they manage to leave and they go driving off for salvation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the best directions. Could be misinterpreted.
Could be, yeah. You know, it's kind of like the Saint of Killers in the show, where he needs to learn how to speak in complete sentences so people know what you're asking for, and then wait for them to actually give you an answer before you kill them.
Very true.
Poor Victor. And now Jesse he's in the coffin, and he's having another vision in which, you know, he meets the cowboy again, but he also sees himself as a child, which is the embodiment of Genesis, which I don't like that.
No.
I don't think Genesis should really have an embodiment.
No, because that's kind of the point.
Because it doesn't have a mind. It is a part of Jesse now. It's melded into him. Also, it's not really explained that Genesis is the child of an angel and a demon in the script. At least not that I noticed. Like, they kind of imply it by, like, having, like, Jesse's shadow turn into, like, it has demon horns and angel wings.
Yeah, it is all just implication, really. They don't outright state anything like that. But
the cowboy and Genesis give Jesse Custer the idea to reach into his pocket and get the fuck communism lighter out. His little Chekhov's gun lighter. And to burn the ropes, and he eventually manages to get the ball gag out, which he manages to lure TC to the coffin and get him to raise it up and let him out. And then I felt like he let TC off really easy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Go count all the trees in Texas, which is kind of based on something in the comic where he tells someone to count all the grains of sand on this beach.
Right.
But I'm like, that guy was nowhere near as awful as TC.
Yeah, true.
Now, Jody sees this from the kitchen window, and he realizes that Jesse is loose, and so he jams corkscrews into his ears to deafen himself.
Which, again, is similar to something that happens in the TV show as well.
Yeah, similar enough when Donnie fucking deafens himself temporarily with a gun.
Yeah.
And so they have their big fight scene, and Jody is kind of getting the upper hand, but then apparently in this version, Genesis also gives Jesse super strength.
Very contrived.
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, like his shadow is turning into like a demon and an angel all at the same time. And they're fighting, and then, he just keeps fighting. He basically just kills him with his super strength, and the Saint arrives while this is all going down, and he basically keeps Marie subdued and keeps her from doing anything. And then, and so Jesse starts ranting at Marie about how all of this was done to toughen him up so that he could survive Genesis, and this was all part of the plan. Like, I don't think, like, making him tough and hard, like making him a hard man is really going to change anything supernaturally speaking.
No.
But whatever. And so the Saint's standing there, and the Saint gives him one of his guns, which is a stupid move.
Very. And it makes no sense.
And Jesse shoots Marie with it, which is a very satisfying death for her.
Oh, yeah.
She just explodes. And then the Saint says, well, God gave her orders, so why don't you help me take down God? To which, first of all, he should have taken the gun back before making the offer. To which Jesse, being Jesse, should say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But then he just says, I'm not doing anyone's shit work, and then tells the Saint to fuck off, essentially.
Yeah, literally. And he just gets him to get out of there.
Yeah, and so then he goes to Tulip's corpse, and he's all sad and depressed, and then the embodiment of Genesis tells him that the word of God is life, and he uses it to bring her back.
Very Hollywood bollocks.
Yes, now, I'm going to talk about the comic spoilers now. There's a whole thing about how the word doesn't work on Jody and TC or Marie, and that's because God has gotten wind that they're after him, and he's using them to get Jesse.
Right.
And so he makes them immune, essentially.
Okay.
And then he lets them kill her, and then brings her back. God brings her back because he's trying to manipulate Jesse into being loyal to him.
Right.
And then takes away their immunity so that when Jesse goes after them again, he can actually kill them.
Okay.
Much more interesting story, right?
Absolutely.
But okay, even with all its problems and the Hollywood happy and just contrived shit, this script could end here. Yeah,
that could legitimately just be the end.
Yeah, this could be the end. Like, the whole Cassidy and Arseface thing wouldn't really pay off, but they if you rewrite it to make it so that what they do actually impacts something and then just have it end here, this would be a much better script.
Yeah, shorter, to the point, and laid out pretty well.
And then it goes on for another act called Salvation for 22 more pages.
It is amazing how much of the script could just be removed completely, and it would be better off without it.
And really, all this last part of the script is just climax.
Yeah.
Because they all converge on salvation.
We're talking about the killers.
Yeah, the killers and the cops.
Yeah.
And it ends and all the characters meet up there. Whatever the hell is going on here. And a huge fight breaks out between all the different killers and all the cops, and the Saint eventually shows up. But in the middle of all this carnage, DeBlanc just randomly appears, says he represents the High Council of Heaven, and says Jesse's too important, he should leave, and that, you are chosen to lead the armies of heaven in some war that's not really explained.
Very vague nonsense.
And Jesse says, no, I'm putting Texas first. If God has an issue with that, he can talk to me. And okay, the Saint shows up after almost all of the killers are dead at this point. Yeah,
and there's like a huge, just massive gunfight.
Yeah, where they each have one of the supernatural guns. They're shooting at each other. This is really cool, actually.
Yeah, and I like the fact that the guns they're explained to not actually fire bullets. They just fire somehow.
Yeah, they never. Well, in the comics, it's explained that his guns just never run out of ammo.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're firing, and the bullets keep colliding in midair. And eventually what happens is that there's one killer who's still kind of alive, and he distracts Jesse long enough to give the Saint an opening to shoot the gun out of his hand.
Which makes no sense. Why wouldn't he just make a killing shot?
Yeah, and so it seems like the Saint has him dead to rights, and Jesse uses the word on him, calling him just a man, which removes his supernatural abilities and just makes him fall dead right there.
Which is crap.
It's crap, but not as crap as Jesse randomly grabbing his gun and killing him in 5 seconds.
No, but it is incredibly OP for Genesis as well. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, Genesis is so OP in this. It's weird.
Yeah.
Because, okay, the comics and the TV show both kind of do things that are a little outside of the box and don't really make sense. Like, there's a bit during the whole Angelville grandmother arc where she has a small group of people that are working for her, and he tells them to burn, and they just spontaneously combust. And in the show, there's the whole go to hell thing.
Yes.
Doesn't make the greatest amount of sense considering his powers, but okay. But here it's just so much stuff he does, it just piles up and gets ridiculous.
Yeah, because by the end of it, he could literally just do whatever he wanted.
And okay, so then they both head off saying they're going for Mexico, and in the ending, we're in a beachside town in Mexico, and Cassidy gets them lodgings with this guy called Hector, which just makes me think of Ace Ventura's landlord in Breaking Bad, Hector with his dinghy bell. And he's described as being like a jovial Mexican Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And so he takes them to their lodgings, and Jesse starts talking to him, and it becomes clear that this guy is God. I don't know how Jesse figured that out.
And it's not even given any kind of gravitas. It's just said. He just states it, and then they move on.
And he's just talking about how this job isn't worth the trouble. I mean, can I take a break? And I'm like, you might as well just be Morgan Freeman from Bruce Almighty. Yeah. And he's like, and Jesse's like, hey, that's kind of bullshit. He's like, whatever, though, this is all part of a plan, and just kind of walks off and disappears.
Yeah,
and that's the ending. And he also says there's much worse than the Saint out there.
Yeah, but it does feel like that, theological cop-out of God works in mysterious ways.
And yeah, I guess he's implying that Airstar and the Grail are out there somewhere.
Maybe.
But I mean, here's the thing. This just leaves so many questions at the end. Like, God isn't confirmed to have left heaven until that scene.
Yeah.
He doesn't really give a reason why. He kinda does, but it's kinda half-assed. It's not really explained what Genesis is, why they needed Jesse, what he's leading the armies of heaven against.
What's this supposed war going on?
What is any of this?
Yeah.
What is the High Council of Heaven? What is their stake in this?
You can see they basically had like this basic plot, but they just failed to explain anything to the average reader.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the comics, I have no clue.
Yeah.
And the Saint is just the big psychopathic bad guy, which he shouldn't be.
No.
And, well, that's it for this script. Basically what happened here is that Sam Mendes was going to do it, but then around 2010 he left and did Skyfall instead. And then this kind of went into hibernation. And also around the time Sam Mendes was in charge, apparently Seth Rogen tried to play Arseface, but that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so it got put into limbo, and then eventually another director got attached, who was DJ Caruso, who did Disturbia.
Oh, yeah, I know, yeah.
And Eagle Eye. And he was attached for a while. Like, he kept coming back and talking about it, and he said he would cast Chris Pine as Jesse Custer, which I can kind of see.
Maybe.
A little bit.
A little bit.
This version of Jesse Custer could be anybody, but Alex Pettyfer is the Saint of Killers, which no.
No.
And then Shia LaBeouf is Arseface.
Fuck off.
Which I think would be kind of funny.
No.
Shia LaBeouf is crazy. He would probably do it.
Yeah, but that's not the same as the Shia LaBeouf that would have been in it at this time.
Well, this was 2012 or so he was already kind of on his way there.
Oh, nah, I don't think so.
You just don't want him in this.
I really don't.
You'd have to bring back your running gag about him from the Constantine review.
Yeah, exactly.
And that just didn't happen. I think it just didn't get the green light. And then the TV show happened.
And we're all thankful for it.
Yeah, and yeah, that's the Preacher episode, and I don't know what the hell else to say.
Yeah.
I'm glad we got what we got.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. For what we got, it could have been a hell of a lot worse. And I think they've done a pretty damn good job. So far, at least.
With a few hiccups here and there, but...
I mean, I don't want to put the horse before the cart, but for the most part, I'm enjoying the hell out of the series.
Yeah, me too.
So, you can't really say much more than that.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be good on the whole. So
yeah,
I guess that's our call to sign off. There's not really a whole lot else to say here. So
yeah,
remember. Oh wait, finish. You were saying something?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say there's no much point in speculating about the future because we already know. Let's just hope it gets more seasons, I guess.
And Fear the Preacher will come out eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. Really, just remember, check us out on Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter. I'll try to link down below. Also, like I said before, check out the Gone to Texas podcast at G2T podcast.com because they're the reason this episode is happening now instead of last Christmas. And really, until next time, bye.
Yeah, bye.